Well, good evening, everybody. The internet's favorite movie-centric list-making podcast is back again. This time, we're going to talk about the olden days, and not just when I was a kid or when Jen was a kid. No, we're going way, 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 way back up your way back machine because we're talking about ancient times. I'm, of course, one of your hosts in this 1021 show, Josh, joined with me as always. Uh, the great one herself, Jen.
I was a kid like just a couple of years ago, so yeah,
Yeah, because this totally was not the era that we lived
actually,
in.
the truth is, I've never actually not been a kid, so age is relative, and we're just gonna go with that. Yeah. I, however, do not remember any of the eras and time periods that we are about to talk about. I mean, I've struggled with this a lot, but I don't really know if I remember any past lives. So I'm thinking, no, I don't really remember any of this stuff.
You
And
know what's funny? You say that. Don't mean to interrupt. It's just funny how when somebody doesn't mean to do something, it's because they just did it. Um, I do remember when I was very young having like preschool kind of age, and I was explaining that I had this dream or what seemed like a dream about watching television, black and white TV,
ooh,
and on it was like this practically prehistoric news show, um, talking about how Alaska was just bought from Russia, and my dad's like, they didn't have TVs back then. I was like, oh, okay, and didn't really think anything of it. Just thought some stupid kid having this weird thought, right? And then it wasn't until years later where, you find out. Well, it no, the news story wasn't that Alaska was bought from Russia. It was Alaska became a state. That's what it was. And then years later, I'm like, doing research as I lived in Alaska, and not research. It's just going to school and learning stuff. Um, they're like, Alaska became a state in 1958. And I started thinking, wait, there were TVs.
so
Maybe
if that
I've
if
seen
that
them.
theory holds true, Josh, you're cycling through lives pretty fast. At the end of this life, come hell, high water, reincarnation, whatever, I plan on taking a long break and, doing whatever kind of equivalent there is to visiting the interstellar cosmos library. So I may not be back for a little while,
So
but
kind of like
it'll all
Captain
be
Marvel.
good. Yes, it'll be great though because I will be very happy. I will be, absorbing knowledge,
Can
which
you
I
can you
apparently I
page
really need.
me? Can you page me when the Star Trek times get here?
I'll try to remember. I don't know. Like I said, I seem to be having kind of sketchy problems between these two, but we'll see. I mean, who knows if that? I don't even know if that's actually what's going to happen. But that's my plan. My plan is, please, nobody cry, nobody get sad or anything like that. Just wish me well. I'm going off to the great library in the sky. So there we go. Nope. Did I lose you?
No, no, you didn't lose me. I'm having. You see what had happened. What it keeps happening.
Oh no. What's happening?
Um, as I'm sharing the. Uh, oh God, this is it's an awful loop. Anyway, as I'm trying to share the episode to Wadco Media Facebook page. By the way, give it a like. Um, the show automatically plays, so I'm hearing you speak live, and then I'm hearing you from
Oh.
like 5 seconds ago.
Wow. Hey, this is really this is well, I won't say that it's fortuitous, but wow, it really fits the theme because we're talking about the past and I'm actually broadcasting from the past, at least in some method, as we're having the podcast. So that's really kind of cool. I mean, talk about a meta experience. We're nailing it tonight. This is really good. But I wanted to mention something before we get started, and
Okay.
hopefully this won't. Uh, I'm going to talk about it actually as my list goes on too. But I just wanted to mention that, and I said this before the podcast to Josh. As I was putting together this list and remembering and then going through and watching some of the actual movies that I wanted to highlight tonight. Um, Hollywood is incredibly uh, homogenous when it comes to its skin color of choice for representing just about every ethnicity around the globe. And I mean, unless like like the only thing that I can think of is like, we wouldn't have Shaka Zulu with a bunch of white people as the army because that would just be like a bridge too far. But everything else is on the table. Do we need Egyptian gods? Let's make them white people. Do we need, you know, um, people that are supposed to be Jewish? Well, let's just make them look like everyday white people. Do we need people from ancient Rome? Yeah, well, let's not make them look Italian or anything. Let's just have them look like, standard American white people. It is just so crazy. I mean, I was really struck by it when I was watching these movies, um, for reasons that I guess we'll get into. But boy, it was kind of unsatisfying. Like, it was really deflating in some ways. And look, time periods are time periods, right? I realize that there's the time period that a film was made in, and then there's also the time period that we're supposed to be, representing. But there is something uniquely almost insidious about representing every single ethnicity with a basic white person. And that is not to say that the actors and actresses in these films are not outstanding. They absolutely are. They deserve accolades. This is not to diminish their work at all, but wow, we really need to fix this. Uh, yeah, this was a big one. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because it's going to definitely come up on my list quite a bit.
Stop the gentrification of Egypt.
Oh, good lord. Oh my god, that was terrible. I mean, seriously, like that was uh, y- I don't know. Look, I've never been to Egypt, but I certainly have seen enough of Egyptian, other than archaeologists, Egyptian people, that that is not who they this is North Africa, right? The
Hmm.
ethnicity in this part of the world is not white people. And oh my gosh, it's terrifying sometimes to watch some of this stuff. Oh boy. Also, I am definitely going to get into some of the really bizarro things that I read as I was putting this list together because man, there are some people out there who have like really strong, great critiques for certain things that I think are like, why are you critiquing that so nicely? This is awful. This is terrible. So anyway, yeah, got some of those up my sleeve too. I hope you had fun with the homework.
Fun is not the word I would use, but it was definitely an interesting dive into the things that I've I've watched over the years, and like you said, patterns that kind of emerged from seeing all of these things kind of like just placed next to each other on a list, and makes you go, okay, this is yeah, yeah.
It's gonna be it'll be a wild night, I'm sure. So do you want to start or shall I start?
I could start. It's
All right,
no problem for me.
let's
I also
go.
have a Wikipedia page opened up, and I know I could have just said from the top of my head, this is the information that I have because
Uh,
I'm super smart. Nope, I'm going to let you know up front. I have a cheat sheet next to me that's going to sort of tell you what era from history this is considered.
oh, okay.
You know, and that way I can kind of give it a little bit of a timestamp from when it takes place. What is deemed ancient, if you will. So figured I'd throw that out there as well as I talk about my top 10 ancient times movies, which you'll be able to find on Letterboxd at 1021pod as soon as this broadcast is over, unless you're listening to a downloaded version of the show, which a lot of you do, by the way. Welcome. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe on all of your favorite podcatchers. Anywho, my number 10, speaking of the gentrification of Egypt, it is a rather mediocre film, but as a young person, I enjoyed it fine. As I got older, it doesn't age so well as far as holding up, but I'm going to choose to remember it as I saw it the first time when I was but a wee 20-year-old. God. Sorry. I'm talking, of course, of 2002's The Scorpion King. It for those of you keeping track at home, this takes place in the I know this one. I just had it. It takes place in the era that is wow, just it's like, here's the ball, let me just drop it.
Oh my god, okay.
It takes place in the Bronze Age. There we go. The Bronze Age, between 3300 and 1200 BC. Boom, nailed it. So, what is the Scorpion King? Remember this guy? Maybe you've heard of him. He goes by the name Dwayne Johnson now, but way back when, in the early aughts, people just called him The Rock. That was his billing. He was just The Rock, because that was his wrestling name, and he was still, a wrestler. For those of you that need a reminder, The Rock. At one point, he was called Franchise Viagra, because if you just inserted him anywhere, the length of the, and never mind. So, the Scorpion
Except
King
Black
is...
Adam.
Well, yeah. Apparently, the effects of Franchise Viagra is wearing off, because not only did Black Adam whimper, so did Fast X, even though his spoilers, he has a cameo in there. Glorified cameo, I should say. So the Scorpion King was his first starring role. It was like a way for him to move into the movies on a more regular basis. You see, before that, he was in a movie called The Mummy Returns, which, people talk about the Flash's CGI and visual effects are not good. Well, yeah, Mummy Returns was not great in that regard. Any one of us could probably do better than that today, and that speaks to more of the democratization of technology than it does, anything else. But even at the time, in 2002, it was bad. Because remember, Jurassic Park came out in the 90s, and that stuff still holds up today. And there's just no reason for it to look as terrible as it did. But I should probably mention the good things that kind of made it worth being on my list, even if it is number 10. I will say this for The Rock's sort of first major starring role, he did fine carrying that sort of action torch, especially when it comes to playing an ancient Akkadian in Egypt, trying to free the tribes and kill sorcerers and whatever that was actually about. Set design was cool. The action was decent, and the thing to really remember is this is sort of what put The Rock out there for anybody not associated with wrestling to really latch on to, and they did that well enough, and it got him more roles, and you know he was never heard from again. So the Scorpion King is my number 10.
Honestly, uh, okay. Yeah, so
That's
that happened.
exactly the response I thought I would get.
Well, yeah, that happened. Yeah. Well, anyway,
I told you I
um,
was struggling for content here.
it's Scorpion King is definitely a super interesting movie. It definitely is. Um, don't ever watch The Scorpion King or The Mummy or The Mummy Returns with anyone who knows anything about ancient history, because
No, no.
yeah, it's not a fun experience. So yeah, anyway,
Should
okay.
I say based
Okay.
on a true story?
I wouldn't even say that. I would just say, this is fantasy. I mean, by this logic, Conan the Destroyer is probably, kind of semi-historical.
This
Anyway.
looking directly at the notes, it says a fantasy action film based on historical king of the proto dynastic period of Egypt, King Scorpion.
Yeah, okay. Well, anyway,
That means it's
since this
true.
is a movie podcast list, I won't, throw on any kind of hat about I won't throw the hat on of being the armchair historian that I love to pretend that I am. And I'll just say, yeah, okay, good movie.
Yes.
Um, okay. Was that it, or did
Yeah,
you have
yeah.
more to
That's
say?
it. I mean, if I say
Okay.
any more, I'm probably gonna, be ejected from the internet for blaspheming good movies.
Okay, well, my number 10 movie, which I wish I could have put it higher, but the movie itself is not all that great, but the designs of the movie were fantastic. I mean, and when I say the designs, I mean, like, the intent and the purposeful driven idea behind it was really good. Okay, so in case you don't know who this is, uh uh Ashoka is the comes from a Buddhist legend, basically. And the idea here is that there has been war for a long time, a very long time. And this one leader decides, okay, no, we're not going to do this anymore. We are going to turn to the path of peace. And it's very difficult to turn away from war, to turn away from aggression, to turn away from the violence. Um, there is a very long road that goes along with this. And the movie, Ashoka the Great from 2001, tries very hard to um it tries very hard to give us a basis for understanding how this epic idea could have come together. And it's it feels it's Bollywood, so keep that in mind. It definitely feels like it is foreign. And part of the reason that I say that is not just because there are obvious, language and dialect issues. It's because the movie itself has a kind of interesting timing in it. Um, our beginning, middle, and end is not it instead of telling a film in 3 acts, it kind of tells a story with, a little bit of a beginning, and then, we get a bit of historical information, and we get some character development, and we really sort of don't come back to what it is that's driving the movie for a couple of acts. Um and it definitely doesn't have a 3 act structure. So from a foreign standpoint, it may feel a little odd to watch, but it is good in the sense that it really is trying to tell this grand story of the person who was who basically, travels under the guise of a common soldier, and tries to convince people to take on the way of peace. It's pretty fabulous when you think about it. And honestly, this movie, because most of the people in this movie are from India, it feels very this is not one that feels whitewashed. This actually feels pretty authentic to the period. Now, I will say this. Um there's some For me, some of the bigger issues in this movie, and it's not a really well-known movie, so there's not a lot of people out there to talk to about it. But if you can get somebody to talk to you about it, one of the things that you'll notice is that the costumes are fantastic. There's a wonderful sense of grand scale. I mean, like how they put together some of these scenes, it is always just mind-boggling to me. Bollywood definitely does big epic scale scenes so much better than we have ever been able to do. Um but y- y- the idea, I think, for the movie that people are drawn to is, there's part love story in it. There's this reconciliation between violence and peace, which is, comes through Buddhism, which is pretty phenomenal. And we don't tend to organize ourselves story wise around stories where peace is the ultimate outcome. We're Oftentimes peace can be like almost like a side effect, but it's a side effect of violence for the sake of violence. And that's exactly what he was trying to avoid. There's really crazy colors in this movie. And that is also obviously another hallmark of a lot of Bollywood. I mean, in recent decades, I feel like they've toned things down a lot, but this movie definitely has that, larger sense of, um, bold whites, bold reds, stark whites, deep, deep blues. So much so that like it's actually really a feast for your eyes. It's really gorgeous. Um, this particular story takes place in the second century, and there is a sort of historical truth to this, but what that historical truth is really shrouded in just as much legend. I feel a lot about this story the way that I do about Please Don't Kill Me. The Christ stories. There's so much legend, there's so much interwoven storytelling around it that you can't really tell the story of Christ the same way twice. Everybody's got a different interpretation of it. There's all of these, mitigating ideas about where, when, how. And that's what happens in Ashoka too. We feel for who the prince is. We get an idea of who everything that is within his purview, and that he basically has everything. And then we get to see the impact and the absolute horror of war. I guess, bottom line, it's a number 10 pick because it is, it to me, it's not a great movie. but it does tell, I think, an important historical tale. And there is a real beauty and almost sensuality that really oozes through, both in the love of philosophy as it pertains to the path of peace, but also the interpersonal sort of like sensuality between the two main characters. It's really a well intentioned film. I think I'll say that. So number 10 for me is Ashoka the Great. It's also just known as in most places Ahsoka. It's pronounced Ashoka, but it will be written Asoka. So if you get a chance to watch, take a take a quick look. I don't think you'll be disappointed, but it's not a number one pick. So there you go.
Well, I have not seen that, of course.
Yeah, I would highly doubt that. I mean, maybe some people out there have seen this movie, but I feel like you kind of have to seek it out to uh you have to want to find this movie to find it. If you're really interested in movies about the origins of Buddhism, which in almost the ultimate irony, are really rooted in a lot of very violent upheaval. It's quite an interesting juxtaposition, and it's sort of amazing. So it's definitely worth watching. But yeah, I can't imagine that a whole lot of people will have seen it. I bring it up because it definitely is one of those good movies of sort of ancient feel to it that does give you a really strong and broad understanding of what was happening in the world, at least in this one place at the time, and sort of how people were thinking. That made it kind of interesting.
One day I'd like to get to a point with this show in particular where we talk about a movie and suddenly it gets this bump where it's like everyone's watching it, no one knows why.
Yeah, why did everybody go pick up that movie?
Because Jen told me about it.
We'll have to start a partnership with Amazon Prime or something like that to see if we can get movies on an actual 10-to-1 watch list, and then you can just go to the Amazon list, grab the watch list, and we'll let Amazon do the logistical tracking for there.
Let them do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a weakling, so let's let the people who can do.
I was going to say, I don't know. Maybe I'm not so correct about that because sometimes the lists are pretty heavy.
Sometimes, yeah, actually, sometimes ours are. This one is. Mine is definitely like the ones that are coming up on my list are they're pretty dramatic. They're big.
Yeah, I almost threw out my back with all the reaching I'm about to start doing.
That's okay. I'll be there to either kind of give you a little bit of jovial shame, or just downright straightforward mocking, and it'll be great.
Just spot me.
I got your back.
So my number 9. Warning you right now, I'm going to keep it brief because it is one that has been brought up on the show before. But I believe, considering the topic, it is worth mentioning again. Set in the classical era, 500 BC to 600 AD, kind of like your number 10. It is Beowulf.
Beowulf. I love this movie.
It is a 6th century Scandinavian warrior, Beowulf, and his mission to slay the man-like ogre Grendel. Like I said, we took a pretty deep dive on this on another episode, so I really don't think I need to rehash over again. All of my thoughts on it. I will say this though: it was for Robert Zemeckis, who directed it, it was a new direction for him as far as style. I don't remember which came out first, this or Polar Express. Maybe you recall.
Um, that's a good question. I think it was actually this movie first, then Polar Express.
The Polar Express was 2004. Beowulf was 2007. So this was
Oh
his
wow.
follow
So
up
this
to
was before. Wow.
um, that. So you could tell he was getting sort of the actors sort of keyed in a little better with this sort of. There are only so many ways you can blend animation with live action. It and it sometimes it's completely contrasting styles, like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit or the Rescue Rangers movie that came out last year, and it's clearly cartoons and real people, kind of inhabiting the same space. And sometimes it's, sort of a let's take live action people and animate them in sort of a rotoscoping way, which I love that style, the rotoscope style. If you haven't seen Undone on Amazon Prime, then by all means check that series out. It's pretty cool. And another way that sort of started becoming more abundant in the early odds is kind of doing a CG live action combination where everything is on a set, on a green screen set, and sort of Sky Captain, in the world of tomorrow, where everyone's just it's all just done. The backgrounds, all that is inserted later, and that's sort of where we are here, which sort of gives you a pretty unique look, especially since, to be frank, between the motion capture performances and I don't know what it is, but maybe it was just the technology at the time. I don't know. There was a bit of a disconnect that we you would think have gotten over by now, but it seems like we did get over it for a minute, and then now we're kind of back there again. Um,
You know, can I interject something here?
no, sure.
Um, we had a hot moment in the 2000s to 2010, 11, 12, where this technology was sort of like the rage. Everybody was trying to come up with a way to use it. The problem is that we were having very uncanny valley sort of feels from it, and people didn't embrace it because it felt weird, because
Hmm.
it didn't give the right sort of expressional tones, because there was something about the stiffness of the way that it was being translated that just didn't quite work. I remember thinking this when I watched the version of A Christmas Carol with Jim Carrey in it, that it's very similar. It's got that same feel, and it's good. I love that particular version, by the way. And I really like this version of Beowulf as well. It tells a good story. The dragon is fabulous at the end. I mean, it's a good story. But there is something about that technology which is, you're right, it's a disconnect, but I think the disconnect is inside of the technology is we keep trying to replicate faces and expressions in a way that feels predictive. And if you know anything about the craft of acting, it's that it's the exact opposite that makes a character feel genuine. It is the either sort of inconspicuous but very important gestures that a character makes. It is the small quirks. It is the interesting expressions that do not stay the same with each look. And that's what they missed. So for a story like A Christmas Carol, where you're dealing basically with Scrooge, who has, two facial expressions, it kind of works. But in Beowulf, we had too many characters and it didn't really work. I will say one thing though, the great late Ray Winstone was in this, and honestly, I cannot think of a better person to be Beowulf. I mean, the, that was just a perfectly hand-picked, excellent choice. Um, but you're right, we are moving back there again, and I cannot quite understand why. I can't understand why when we've had performances like Andy Serkis in The Lord of the Rings doing Gollum.
Hmm.
I don't feel. I mean, okay, maybe it doesn't feel uncanny valley because Gollum is Gollum, but honestly, like that technology, that is believable in a crazy way. And yeah, this stuff is very. Uh, it's. I don't know. Yeah, the best way I can say it is just it gives me very uncanny valley kind of feels.
I started playing a game called Far Cry 6.
Hmm.
It is the sixth installment of the Far Cry series. Well, it's actually more than that. But anyway, this isn't the Far Cry podcast. Um, the point I'm getting to is, Giancarlo Esposito plays the main antagonist in it, and his performance capture is it's good. It's very good, especially for a game, um, and a bit more polish and sort of how they have a way to render things more completely. I think going
Hmm.
through one of these cinematic engines and actually, recorded and played through a large enough processor where we have the technology, like you said, we've
Yeah.
gotten great motion capture performances, but I don't know, just the last couple years, the Flash, not to keep bringing that film up, it just I saw it and I'm like, why why are we just taking steps backwards?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's all very confusing to me, especially um, since Beowulf, for what it was for the time it was made, did a great job. Um, I'm not going to say it holds up animated wise, but everything else about it is just it's pretty good, and it's
Although,
a story that deserves some recognition.
although I will say that if you want Beowulf without Uncanny Valley, there is a version with Gerard Butler that came out around the same time, like 2004, 2005, something like that. And that one, it's a different it's a different story because you know, not everything is CG. So it necessarily feels a little bit different, but it is a good story. The Beowulf and Grendel story with Gerard Butler is also a really good story. And I mean, it's Beowulf. So you really can't screw the story up so much. The one thing that your movie has going for it is Angelina Jolie as Mama Bear, and
I didn't want to
oh
say it.
man, she is amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing. So, yeah.
Correct.
Well, that was a good pick. Very good pick.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. My next movie is also along the lines of probably not exactly historically factual, but it's still a great movie that is, I think, it tells a good story. Now, there's a reason that I chose this one, and there's a reason that it's at number 9, and that I didn't choose Hero, because then it would be probably my number 1 pick, and it would have canceled out a whole bunch of other movies that I put in there. So, and we've talked before on this podcast about how much I love Hero. I will watch it every day until the day I die if I could. I absolutely love this movie so much. But the movie that I chose was a movie called Redcliffe. Now, Redcliffe is really similar to the story that is Hero because it is basically the same. It's the retelling, a different telling of the emperor who basically figures out that the only way to get peace is to declare war on everybody. Much like Ashoka, except that instead of choosing the path of Buddhist peace, he chooses the path of bloody battle. He does eventually get to a united China, but it takes a very long time, and it's his legacy, his destiny, his long lasting legend. And there's been countless movies that have sort of tried to deal with this. A lot of them are Chinese, and so we wouldn't probably get to see them. We don't have distribution rights here in the West for a lot of movies that are from China. But I will say that this movie, done by the Beijing Film Studio, was absolutely stellar also for telling this story. Now, this story is less about the hero, telling the emperor why and what he should do, and more about the actual strategy and the battle functions that went into this. It's basically at the end of the Han Dynasty, and it's before the period that we call the Three Kingdoms. And if you've ever played a video game about China, the Three Kingdoms always sort of comes into some kind of play. Either you have some kind of anecdote about it or you talk about it, because it is absolutely an important period in Chinese history. It's There's something really interesting about this particular movie, which sort of supersedes some of the other films about this particular period in Chinese history, and that is that and the director says, the director's name is John Woo. He even says, look, I decided that rather than stay 100% historical with my movie, I'm going to add some contemporary takes on how people feel and what they experience. And we're not going to make it the just dry, well, that maybe is the wrong terminology, but we're not going to literally pick it up out of history and put it onto film. And I think that he made a really good choice, because there's a lot of very strong character associations that the viewers can make with the characters in the movie, and it feels good. Like, it feels right to want to be on the right side, even though technically, there's a lot in here that is rather convoluted. And if you don't know Chinese history, I don't even know if you'd know which side to be rooting for, but the movie makes it pretty clear who we're supposed to be empathetic toward. It's a really, really interesting movie altogether. This movie is also one of those movies that is done in it's really long. It is, I want to say it's like, I think the whole movie together is almost 300 minutes, which is a long movie. It's broken up into part 1 and part 2. There is an abridged version, which basically takes out a lot of battle scenes, and I do mean a lot. So you just basically like get introduced to the battle, blah blah blah, and then it's done. It's not quite as satisfying as the full version, but man, you better have a Sunday or a Saturday to just sit and watch this thing and, be really immersed in this world. Um, you'll be rewarded, but 300 minutes is a long commitment to a film. Um, I think the other thing, which is like super interesting about this movie, is it does really feel like whether you are on whichever side you're on, camera angles matter. They play such a huge part in helping the viewers understand not just which side we're supposed to be on or what we're doing, but also like where the center of action is. And this is nothing new. Hitchcock used really good camera angle techniques to give us all kinds of psychological cues and scares and you know interesting pieces of information. But in Chinese cinema, it's not quite as pronounced. And Redcliffe really goes out of its way to make really excellent use of camera angles. There's also the big and probably best part of this movie, which is also, why I said the abridged version is not so great. The battle sequences in this particular film are stunning. I mean, just stunning. Like, however this all happened, insert movie magic here, there is something absolutely tingling about watching it all come together. It's just it defies sort of real explanation. You have to see it in order to really appreciate it. So I'm going to go with Redcliffe as my number 9. It is if you liked Hero, you will like Redcliffe, but for different reasons. So, same sort of story. Imagine if you picked up right after Hero was done. What do we get? We get this. We get what should happen here. It's really amazing. And also, I just have to mention, there's a scene in here where they let about 20 ships basically. I guess I'll just say it this way: there is a 100,000 arrow scene in this movie, and it is so cool. It is just like legendary in my mind about how crazy that was and what the spectacular effect it had on the actual cinema. It's gorgeous, just absolutely gorgeous. So I highly suggest it. Please go watch it. It's so really good.
Red Cliff.
Yes, indeed. And this is another movie that, obviously it was shot in China. Well, it was actually shot China, Hong Kong, Japan, South Korea, and I think some of it was actually shot in the US, but um it this is not a whitewashed movie. Um this is definitely a movie that takes ethnicity very seriously. And it feels like that too. It feels, if there was a term for patriotism the way that we understand it for the history of China, this movie would be one of those pieces. The way that we see movies about 1776 and the American Revolution, this kind of movie in China is very much like a part of that feeling for them. So,
Okay, it's unfortunately not available to stream on any of my favorite streaming services, but I love me a John Woo flick.
oh man, he's so good. He's such an excellent director. I mean, just yeah, really, really, really good. So I highly suggest it. In fact, to me, this is a kind of movie that you get to DVD because you get extras, because you get some behind the scenes stuff, and you get commentary, and it's worth it to listen to the commentary because there are just things that you'll rewind and you'll go, oh my god, how did they do that? That is so unbelievably insane. So, yeah, totally worth it.
Well, I guess it's time to move on to my number 8.
It is time for your number 8. And I hope I'm not going on too long with these movies. I love these antiquity movies, or movies that, are from a time period that is further back than the Middle Ages, which is usually where I actually stop. So,
Well, it's funny you should mention going back, because my next movie from 2009 goes back. It goes way back. like all the way back,
Oh.
like all the way to year one.
I knew you were going to pick this one.
Of course, I was going to pick this one. Year
Who doesn't
one,
love Jack Black?
I I think everybody loves Jack Black. I mean, like literally everybody, from adults like us that have been watching him since Tenacious D, and when when I was asked to do that impression of Jack Black on where was it? The Wadcast. I was asked on the Wadcast, do an impression of Jack Black. So I did my impression of Jack Black from The Jackal. Where he holds up the what was it, a pack of cigarettes and Bruce Willis shoots his hand off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did that impression. And they're like, no, Jack Black. And I'm like, yeah, Jack Black. He's been around for quite longer than many people realize, just kind of being there. You might recall he was in The Cable Guy. Not as anybody really super important, but the fact that you can watch it years later and go, holy crap, Jack Black was in this. But he wasn't Jack Black then. He was just Jack Black, some guy. Anyway, it also stars Michael Cera. So if this sounds like the comedy duo for you, then let me just throw in that it was written and directed by Harold Ramis.
That always makes it good.
So you got this trifecta of comedy here about these two guys that live in the way back and are kind of they're kind of wandering where way back in the beginning they run into Cain and Abel. They end up in the city of Sodom, and they encounter a lot of biblical moments, and add this comedic twist to it. So it's kind of in some ways a Bible parody, I guess, if you want to say that. And if that's the kind of thing that you can find funny, then by all means check this out. When it comes to these ancient films, there's a lot of stress on either we need to make it accurate to the portrayal of the times, or we need to make it we need you to feel this thing to really appreciate the setting, whether it's grand sets to where you're just given this epic sense of adventure, which we'll get to in a little bit, or you can have something like this where it's funny. It's just funny. Year one, excuse me. It's not going to win any awards, and I would usually say at this time it's not going to make anybody's favorite movies, list. But I did run into someone that believes a certain Z Snyder makes, no, that's too obvious. That a certain Zach S makes like the best superhero movies, and it's like, that's neither here nor there. So I'm just saying, I don't put anything past anybody anymore, even though I really, really enjoy this movie. And I think it's absolutely hilarious, especially the takes on the biblical stories that they just kind of totally, fillet and roast. I This kind of thing's right up my alley. I don't really know what else I can say about that. It's an absolutely hilarious film and absolutely deserves to be on my list of ancient civilizations in number 8.
Fun fact, when year one came out, myself and I was a young single mom, And one of the things that we used to do quite often was play on this game that was online called Gaia. And when year one came out, all this new Gaia sort of merch, which was basically just digital for your avatar, came out. And I can remember us being so excited about this and having like zero idea why. But we all went to go see it in the theater. And so it was super fun. Good choice. Very good choice.
Thank you very much.
Okay. My next movie is another movie that nobody has seen because, why break the trend? I'm on a roll here. This movie is French. Speaking of which, the other day we were watching a movie and my full name, well, I won't say my whole full name, but my full name that Jen is the abbreviation for is Jeunesse. And jeunesse means youth in French. And I heard somebody say it in a sentence on a movie that we were watching, and I was so excited that I lost track of everything else that was happening in the movie because they said my name. Okay, but this movie, they don't say jeunesse in this movie, unfortunately. But this movie is a French movie. It has beautiful subtitles. It is absolutely gorgeous. And please, if you if you think about a movie as being worth watching and reading subtitles, um, you get a lot out of it. So I don't know if there's an English dub to this particular movie, but I feel like it's definitely worth it to hear it in its native spoken language because it is pretty gorgeous. Um, okay, so this is the name of the movie is called Druids. Um, Druids is kind of it's a very interesting idea. Um, it was put out in 2001. Um, they call it an epic historical drama. I mean, that's sort of like open to wild interpretation, but I will say that it is definitely epic. And the historical part of this is there are pieces that intertwine with real history, but like all fiction in history, you have to sort of give it yeah, this is fictive history, not actual history. So please don't think that everything that's happening in the movie is what really happened. We know so little really about what was happening at this time. And everything that we do know sort of comes from archaeological evidence, which is, missing big pieces. Um, and even the places that we know a lot about, we don't know as much as we really should to tell really complete stories about. So, um, in this particular movie, there's a place which I'm sure that you've heard of called Gaul. Okay. And there there's a druid chieftain who sees a comet and he interprets that as a sign that there will be a new king. And as our story progresses, we begin to understand that this history is very tied in um, with the Roman Empire's desire to completely control Gaul, to basically take it away. And Julius Caesar is the commander here. Um, there is a battle in this movie that is at the end, which is a historical battle called the Battle of Alesia. And as history goes, that really was very decisive. Rome had a very difficult time with Gaul, and in fact, there's a lot of comments in in historical texts about how the Gallic Wars were very difficult for the Romans. They really had a hard time because they were very far away from their supply lines, but they also had a really hard time because they really just didn't understand tactical warfare that was more guerrilla, if you will. And that's really not the right way to say it, but less. formation and more sort of uh, roaming militia, if you will. It's kind of interesting. The Gauls were very effective fighters. Okay, so going back to the movie, it stars Christopher Lambert, and most people know Christopher Lambert from There Can Be Only One in Highlander, but he's been in a lot of movies, and this particular one is a really good role for him. It works really well. There's also Max von Sydow, sorry, and he's amazing too in this movie. In fact, I would say that almost everybody in this movie is really effective in the roles that they are portraying. Absolutely. Um, of I think maybe primary importance, and one of the reasons that I put this on my list is okay, so there is sort of the yes, Caesar uh he has this thing with the Gauls. He's really upset that, they haven't been able to basically subjugate them. And he tries very hard to say, okay, look, I'll give you a chance, bow to us and we'll figure out a way to, kind of live in quasi peace. But, you'll this is Roman territory. And the Gauls are like, no, obviously, no, this isn't going to happen. And the things that sort of happen that we normally get represented come from the Roman side. And what we see in this movie is a lot of what was really happening on the other side. Why was this so difficult? What was the opposing view, if you will? Why was the Gaelic, um, Gallic, not Gaelic? Why was the Gallic? Um, why was that so difficult, just in terms of what their culture said about being subjugated by the Romans. But also I think there's something else in here which I found very interesting, and that was this idea that while the Romans were looking at things with very hard tactics, um the Druids were not. There was something about sort of ascertaining for the rest of of their country, their group, that no matter what, they were in control, that this was their place, this was their culture, this was their society. So it's kind of an interesting idea that's going on here. um I- it ends kind of sadly, and that is historically also accurate. um but there is some, I think, interesting karma that also sort of happens at the end, which I feel like they didn't have to put in, but gratuitously it kind of made sense. So yeah, it's actually a really good movie. The one thing I will also say about Druids is, once again, the cinema in this is really good. Cinematography for Druids is shot with kind of it's weird because you wouldn't think there would be such big sweeping shots here, um just because of the nature of what we've got going on in the film, but there are plenty of those and they really look gorgeous. So number 8 for me is Druids. Definitely worth a watch if you can find it. And again, if there is an English dub, okay, but I would read subtitles.
I'm also a subs over dubs guy.
Yeah, yeah. There's something to me. There's actually something very both interesting, just being kind of a cinephile, but also uh, just from a linguistic standpoint of hearing other languages as they are being natively spoken. And sometimes subtitles are not perfect, and that's okay. We still get the understanding of what's happening. And if it's a good movie, which this is, the action will speak volumes above any small sort of, okay, well, you can't really translate that, it doesn't quite work. So the subtitles are just fine here.
Well, I appreciate the addition of this to your list, and it's definitely one that I feel like I will want to check out.
It's
So
good.
add
It's
it
very
to the watch list,
all right.
and hopefully it'll,
So you,
Letterboxd will notify me when it's available. Well, it will. That's what Letterboxd does.
there you go.
So we are on
Number 7.
my number 7.
Indeed.
You thought I couldn't go farther back than year 1? Well, you're wrong. You're totally wrong. Because I'm not just going back to ancient civilizations. No, I'm going back to prehistory, the very beginning. We're talking cave people.
Uh-oh.
Doesn't get much more ancient than that.
Guess not.
And yes, while technically this film is a cartoon and it's not 100% accurate, it's a as far as fauna goes, it's still a surprisingly enjoyable watch. I'm talking about 2013's The Croods. Check this out.
Oh my god.
Let's start with, you have a cast, a voice cast, mind you, but a cast nonetheless, with Nicolas Cage, Emma Stone, Ryan Reynolds, Catherine Keener, Clark Duke, Cloris Leachman. That's a killer cast. And you got them all to be in your movie. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And you got to be in this movie that was DreamWorks Animation, who, at that point, they've done some stuff, but quite frankly, they've always been kind of a little hit or miss at times, So to get this cast to go, yeah, we'll do this. We'll make this movie about a family of cave people that, sort of, I don't want to say inexplicably, but they survive a lot of natural disasters because Grug, the patriarch of the family, Nicolas Cage's character, he's very opposed to change and the outside world, and just kind of not letting anything influence the way he thinks. So when the daughter of the group, Eep, played by Emma Stone, comes across Guy, played by Ryan Reynolds, a sort of inventor that invents things. He's walking around with a torch, and he's like, "Yeah, it's fire on a stick. I invented it," and it's sort of amazing to her. And she tries to let her know, "Hey, disaster's coming," but her dad's like, "No, this is all new, and we don't do that here." Then their home gets destroyed, and they have to sort of take it on the road. But you can't take it on the road because those weren't invented yet. That's how far back this ancient civilization goes. So it's very much a look at Grug, for one, who, I mean, let's face it, we all know somebody that's just so adamant against change and the world changing around them, and just can't quite deal with it. And we all know a guy, that's the character's name, to remind you of that. We all know someone like that that's just trying so hard to convince you it's in your best interest to abandon these old ways because they're outdated and they're wrong. And, quite frankly, outdated doesn't even do uh, the idea justice. They're obsolete. And for you old school Judge John Hodgman listeners, you understand the clear difference between obsolete and outdated. So that's why I wanted to stress the importance there. They're obsolete ideologies that have no business in this new slash ancient world. Uh, the misadventures happen, misunderstandings happen, people get trapped, inventions have to be made, and Grug eventually has to learn, yeah, if we're going to keep living in this world, we need to start adapting to it. So, what really surprised me, other than all of that, allegorical stuff about that drunk uncle at the family picnics, um, is the fact that this is a surprisingly well executed family film. It's one of those movies where whether you're a kid, going, I love cartoons, or an adult that likes, sort of a cool subtext to a story being told, the Crudes will deliver for you. I wish I could say I could tell you the series maintains that level of quality, but this is the only one I've seen. To be honest, I don't know if it maintains, but hopefully I'll find out eventually. I'll watch the Crude too. It's become this whole thing, but the Crudes is definitely one of those films where if you have kids, it's worth a watch. And quite frankly, if you're just curious based on the things that I said, it's definitely worth a watch. So that's why it's my number 7.
Okay. Uh, I guess I kind of feel the same way about the Croods as I would like if we were going to use Land of the Lost as a. Well, it is ancient.
Doesn't get more ancient.
Oh boy. Okay.
Although
All
I will
right.
say
Well,
I did throw off uh, dinosaur related films.
uh, I mean, okay. So my big problem is, I don't mind Jurassic Park, and I don't mind, Jurassic World, and I don't mind any of the movies that bring dinosaurs forward. But the moment that we start putting people back with dinosaurs, time travel, I guess, is one thing, but I've seen way too many and read too many ridiculous stories where people are supposed to have existed with dinosaurs. And from a science standpoint, first of all, that's not real. But secondly, it feels like such a bastardization of history. Like, I
Yeah.
know it's exciting, guys, to think that, man was like battling a T Rex or a Stegosaurus or whatever. And hey, you know what? If you want to get into that, watch the movie 64. Was that what it was called? Um
64, 65, something like that.
64, 65, yeah,
Adam
whatever.
Driver.
Yeah, Adam Driver, right. Go watch that movie. 65, it was 65. Because I mean that does sort of, pit both things together, but it scientifically it kind of makes more sense. Um I hate this idea that man, because you know what it feels like, because it feels like revisionist history, and it drives me nuts. So, anyway. Okay. I would actually even watch the movie Dinosaur over that. My kids used to watch that all the time. They loved that movie. Okay, so okay, my number 7 choice. Okay, please don't hate me for this because I know it's mindless. I know it's ridiculous. I know it's not the creme de la creme of movies. It's my number 7 choice because I personally like this movie. Um, and I really just like it it because it is kind of mindless. But I love the movie aesthetics, and I think the nostalgia that this brings up in me. Like I think I saw this movie and it just like hit at a time when I needed for that to be a thing. I don't even know why. It's called The 13th Warrior. Most people know who the 13th Warrior is. It stars Antonio Banderas. It is a loose adaptation, interestingly enough, of Beowulf. it and when I say loose, I mean loose. It's sort of like if we took Beowulf and we kind of gave it a an adaptation, an old world adaptation. There's plenty in the 13th Warrior that is that comes like right out of Viking lore. There's Ragnar. There's 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 references in the 13th Warrior to the mother of Wendell. There is a character that is supposed to be um well, let's just say that there's some interesting other characters. There's characters that are cannibals that dress up, and that's what Wendell is. That they dress up as bears and they live like bears. And so it's like they're the beast. They're the creatures that come and take you in the night. It's kind of it's a very interesting take on the Beowulf story. Um, y- Honestly, it is what it is. It's kind of, to me, this is like a guilty pleasure, a la, and I think I've said this before, Conan or Conan the Destroyer, right? I love those movies, but they're terrible. I mean, I know they're terrible. 13th Warrior is kind of no different. Like, there isn't a lot of critical acclaim, there's no redeeming value to it. In fact, this movie lost a ridiculous amount of money. The budget was like 160 million, and I think at the box office it earned about 60 million. So they lost like $100 million. It's amazing that anybody on this film ever worked again. But it's a fun movie, and it definitely gives you like real um old Viking feel, like Viking prior to Viking. And it's super interesting the way that they do some of their like the giant worm is not actually a worm, it's actually just fires, and like there's a lot of sort of creative cool stuff happening here. I'm not going to say a whole lot more about it because I feel like, a lot of people have already seen this movie, but it gets my number 7 choice for just being a fun movie that definitely fits the genre that we're talking about. So, number 7 for me is The 13th Warrior.
The movie based on Michael Crichton's Eaters of the Dead.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it just wasn't, it did not, that story is actually a really good story, but the movie didn't quite get it right. But it still was good. I mean, I can't I can't I can't sit here and say, "Oh, that's like so unwatchable." Like a lot of critics really, pan it so hard. But I
Yeah.
can't sit here and say that because it's enjoyable for what it is. It's not highbrow entertainment. It's just action fun. And again, kind of the same way that Conan is. Like, you're not. I doubt Howard E. Lee uh, is looking. Not Howard E. Lee. I just can't believe I just said that. Um, I doubt anybody is looking at um, this movie and making the correlation that somehow the writing is, oh my gosh, if only people would just again look at this and say, yeah, hey, this was a good story. No, they're not. They're definitely not. It's Robert E. Howard. I can't believe I forgot that. But like Robert E. Howard, if he had been around when Conan was made, um isn't like he was going to be saying, oh my god, yeah, you guys really nailed this, because that wasn't the point. The point was not to get the source material right. The point was to have fun, and that's what I think the 13th Warrior did.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. And it's weird how when Jurassic Park really blew up and people really got on the Michael Crichton train, the delivery of films just never really met the epicness of the stories that he wrote.
Yeah,
Jurassic Park being a
I
notable exception with some changes to the story that
I felt that way about Sphere, which was an amazing book. I mean, amazing.
it
Like
was
it was
literally my favorite
good.
book as a young teenager.
And when I watched the movie, I was like, "What's this? This is not what I no no. This isn't. This does not feel like that story."
I gotta say, watching Sphere actively anchored me,
Yeah,
being
because
such a
the
big fan of
story
the
was
book.
so good, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's the only movie that's ever done justice, I think, for the other than Jurassic Park, which yeah, but even then the book was still way better. Is the Andromeda Strain. There have been several versions of the Andromeda Strain that have really done some good stuff. And kind of captured the dread that was supposed to be what was the Andromeda Strain. And I feel like some of those adaptations have done a good job. But man, Michael Crichton's stories are a little bit like Stephen King stories. People love them, but the adaptations are just so bad. Timeline was one with Gerard Butler. It was terrible. And I loved Timeline. It was medieval days, it was time travel, it was everything that I wanted it to be in a story, and then you watch it on the screen and it's like, "W did you read the book?" I mean, were the writers, like, drunk at the time that they were doing the adaptation? What happened here? So,
drunk
yeah.
writers. That sounds more like Super Mario Brothers,
Oh
the
god, it's
'90s
just
version.
awful. But I mean, I also think that about Stephen King stories because, like, I'm always thinking, wow, this is such a great story, and then you watch a Stephen King movie and you're like, what? Did
It's like,
did
why are you letting anybody other than Frank Darabont touch your material?
did the monkeys suddenly get a hold of the pens in the? But what happened here? Yeah. So anyway,
Well, I'm going to have to reveal something at the end of the show here. But that's at the end of the show right now. I guess we're going to talk about number 6.
number 6.
I'm going to make it super duper fast. Hope you don't mind.
No,
Because it's
I
either
get
on
this.
your list, which would be great. Um, because I know for a fact that you must have strong feels for this movie.
Okay.
Um, but if it's not, I don't think I could do it the justice that it needs. So I will probably wind up saying, Jen, tell us about this movie because I know you know all about it. So you ready?
I'm ready.
My number 6, Clash of the Titans.
Wow. Okay. Good choice. That's kind of that's like a shout out to that's definitely a shout out to an era. That is for sure.
Now, some of you might be wondering, well, Josh, they there are two very distinct versions of Clash of the Titans. One that was made within the last what 10, 15 years or so. I don't remember when that was
Yeah, it was
made.
a
It was
while
the
ago.
first movie I ever saw as an adult in what is modern day 3D. I was like, wow, this is a waste of money. Um, no offense to the movie itself, but it just seemed like one of those movies where they were like, well, we could throw in the 3D effects afterwards, right? That should justify the extra ticket um, charges. It just didn't sit right. Watching it in regular old, non 3D was just fine. It's fine. Um, but I'm talking very specifically about the 1981 Clash of the Titans, a movie so old that it predates me.
Mm,
How about that? This is one of those that, whether it was history class or English class, whenever there was a lull in the year or an end of the year thing going on, everyone was like, "We're just gonna put on Clash of the Titans, and you kids can sit here and watch uh, this." And we did, and we did, and for the most part, I think people that grew up like us, where they wheeled in the whatever they were going to show something on from the AV room long before TVs were like standard in the classroom. That we would sit down and love the fact that we're watching a movie today, and it's an adventure movie, and it's a lot of fun. But when it comes to the the 1981 Clash of the Titans, some people might be a little. I mean, if you're not into the filmmaking style at the time, there's a lot of stop motion. There's just things that back then we thought were amazing, and today people sort of expect computers to do. And I think I might speak for you a little bit, Jen. Say, the if you can go practical, you should pretty much always go practical. You don't need to let computers do everything for you. Case in point, the new Nightmare on Elm Street. While I'm sure it was all spooky and stuff, but there's just nothing quite like actually having something tangible, something that you can see and fear, or in some cases just enjoy, right there on set with you, as an actor. Now that was a tangent I didn't expect to go on. Anyway, um, Clash of the Titans. Okay, basically, Perseus has to do a bunch of stuff to get married to Andromeda, if I'm not mistaken. And there's you gotta fight Medusa, you gotta face a Kraken, you gotta tote along robot owl. It's a lot of good fun, a lot of you know fabulous adventure, and all done in a very very classic 80s style. Like you said, Jen, it definitely represents an era. Um, I said I wasn't going to go on too long, but here I am. Uh, but Jen, if there's anything you want to add, if you don't have it on your list, and then by all means, um, have at it.
Okay, well, a couple things. One thing is, and Clash of the Titans. It is not on my list, but it is one of my. This is definitely a favorite of mine.
I
Um,
knew it.
the the okay, so Clash of the Titans itself, very interestingly, is one of Ray Harryhausen's last movies. And if you don't know who Ray Harryhausen is, please really look up Ray Harryhausen. He's one of the absolute supreme gods of stop motion animation in a time when stop motion animation was still very much a thing. And Ray Harryhausen did the Sinbad movies. Ray Harryhausen did a bunch of movies which coincidentally were about dinosaurs. He had a very stylistic effect on Clash of the Titans. That's number one. Number two, Clash of the Titans brings together a number of Greek and Roman myths, which are super interesting. They kind of convolute them just a little bit, which is sort of always weird. But the story is about Perseus, and Perseus is a demigod without really realizing it. He is a son of Zeus, and he, as such, is given a bunch of tools, a bunch of extra things, magical armor, the owl, the mechanical owl, and intervention basically by Zeus and the pantheon to help him along his way. And there's the convolution of stuff comes in where yes, did Perseus defeat the Kraken, and how did Perseus defeat the Kraken? That some of those things are a little bit weird, because Medusa's head, which was actually won by by Perseus, yeah, they kind of make there's a little bit of weird convolution going on there, but it's still a really good story. I think the story at the heart of this that is the most interesting is the story of Calibos, who is and his big giant vulture, who is basically trying to seduce Andromache, and that becomes a really interesting line of Greek mythology, which Clash of the Titans tries to bring together. Um, I think, and the other interesting, part of Clash of the Titans is the whole reason that all of this happens is the story of Cassiopeia, who is the mother, and she basically compares her beauty. I'm sorry, I said Andromache and I meant Andromeda. She compares the beauty of Andromeda to Andromache was a figure in the Trojan War. That was Hector's wife, anyway. Um, the idea here is that Cassiopeia compares Andromeda's beauty to that of Aphrodite. And Aphrodite basically gets, really upset and mad and punishes Cassiopeia. And one of the punishments is um, basically sacrificing her daughter. And this is all kind of where the myth and storytelling get a little bit wanky. It's not actually sort of what the myths say, but it's a really interesting retelling and it's fun. I do definitely like this story. I love in this movie how they do uh how they give Perseus his armor, how he how he understands the idea of Calibos, and basically, like, gives the cut off version of his hand at the wedding. I love also the Stygian witches. That scene is haunting. It's like one of the best, I think, of the Stygian witches that there is. I really, really, really like it. Um, just a bunch of things. I mean, I wish that they would have gone into a little bit more detail on some of the other things. Um, but overall, this is just a fun movie to watch, and the creme de la creme of stop motion animation with Ray Harryhausen's The Kraken is so iconic. It's so excellent. It's worth it just to watch that, just to watch the stop motion animation with the Kraken at the very end. So, great pick, really good, excellent. I love it, absolutely.
I knew you would.
Just not to go too far, but since we are talking about antiquity and we're talking about movies from the past, I have never seen, and it's one of the things that I've always thought would make a great movie. I've never seen a story that was the Medusa origin story. And the story of Medusa is so sad and so complicated. And we think of Medusa as just a Gorgon monster, hair with snakes. And, in almost every single movie or show that we watch Medusa in, she's always just such a terrible, mean, spiteful person. And in all honesty, the origins of who Medusa is just heartbreaking. I mean, it's like one of those stories that, man, why don't we tell those stories? And I mean, I know why we don't tell those stories, right? Because patriarchy, and we don't tell the stories of women the way that we tell the stories of men in myth. But this one is really good. Yeah, so we definitely need a movie that is the Medusa origin story. It would make such a compelling film. We'll have to figure out how to do that someday.
Yeah, she's very much a victim.
Oh, definitely. And not just the victim, but the victim in the worst possible way, you know, because plaything of the gods. So it fits perfectly in with the with the whole, when we see Clash of the Titans, we see Perseus, who is gifted by the gods. And so, we kind of get like a different feel. But in most stories about Greek and Roman mythology, human beings are just playthings. They really, you pray to the gods in deference because you know that you are at their mercy, not because you think that they are going to be benevolent to you, but because you don't want to incur their wrath. It's a subtle distinction, but it's really important. So yeah, super
as
interesting.
as depicted in this movie, where people are like literally being moved around, uh, like pawns on a
Yes,
game board.
yes, exactly. Yep, 100%, 100%. Okay, well, great choice, very good choice.
Cool.
Okay, so my number six, which I won't spend a million years talking about, is called Missing Link. Um, Look, Missing Link is one of those movies that's like, if you know what this movie is, um, you get a really good feel for, um, and it's not the 2019 movie. It's a movie. Oh man, what year did this movie come out? Now I'm gonna have to look it up. Um, Missing Link is one of those movies that's like, um, basically it follows the story of sort of like the last Neanderthal. And he is on kind of like a revenge mission. Um, and it, the the idea is that we're sort of getting to how how the Neanderthals died out, how like there weren't any, and what took their place and what was happening, in that span. It's super interesting because it's not something that I feel like we think about a lot. It's something that we more or less, um, kind of just assume. And we've had a lot of interesting ideas about the science behind this and how Neanderthals, like what was really happening, what made, um what made Homo sapiens sort of take over from that line of man. And it's complicated. There's a lot that's sort of like in there, but there's also some really hard questions in here, which, I don't know about the science behind it all, but it's really compelling. I really like this movie a lot. I also think, if I could, say one other thing, the thing that makes this movie I think work, is, it was done in the late 80s, and as a movie in the late 80s, I feel like we were trying to explore this idea of not just like where does humanity come from, but did we was humanity something that Homo sapiens by themselves sort of had? And Missing Link kind of, it sort of asks that question in a very roundabout way, but it definitely asks the question. What about this was important? The directors were Carol and David Hughes, and as a team, they're actually really good. I like them a lot. Um, but I think maybe one of the bigger pieces about this is how or why does it even matter that we look at, um, the substrata of Homo sapien and all the other sort of stratas of those relationships? Because I think, especially if you are reading the fiction of it, you get that feeling of, oh yeah, okay, these lives matter. But if you are just looking at this from a science standpoint, it almost feels like maybe they weren't quote unquote people. Like, well, they were from a different line of, uh of they were a different offshoot of our evolutionary process. And so as such, we don't think of them as being like us in any way. And missing link really bridges that gap. It really makes you understand that no, just because they were a different substrata does not mean that there weren't real important feelings and and ideas that they also had. And just because they did not succeed as a species does not mean that they were less of a species than we are. Just brings up a lot of philosophical, really cool questions. Very much liked it. This is not a movie that I feel like, although I think it could have benefited a little bit from a more diverse cast. I can't tell. I mean, people are under a lot of makeup here. Um but it's supposed to take place on the steppes, deserts, and mountains in I think he starts in, I forgot where he starts. I can't remember. But I mean it runs a huge gamut of geographical locations, and that in and of itself makes it absolutely stunningly gorgeous. There's a lot of him, um, and he's only credited as being man ape. Um, and there's a lot of pictures, a lot of scenes of him alone in the stark wilderness. And as a result, it's really gorgeous. I mean, it's just there's something about it that's just really cool. I feel a lot about this movie the way that I felt about the movie Iceman. The movie Iceman has that similar feel to it. There's another movie that came out like right around sort of the same time, I think. Oh no, actually, this movie came out much later. I'm sorry. But there was a movie that came out called Neanderthal, and this movie, the movie Neanderthal, is uh has like there isn't it's not fictionalized. It doesn't it tells a true story. And so it didn't quite hit the same way as Missing Link, where there's actual sort of it's a story of revenge. So anyway, Missing Link gets my number 6 choice.
Alrighty. And here I thought, maybe going prehistoric was too much. And you went even further than me.
Oh man, it was so interesting to watch. Africa, he's in Africa, is where he is. It was so interesting. It's one of those like cerebral sort of movies. There's a narrator, there's, eh, but it's a story, and I don't know, it's good. I felt like it was really good. So
Well, it's time to crack into the top five.
top five.
And as much as I hate to say it, my number five is. I made a joke at this director's expense a little bit earlier, and
Uh
turns out this is actually one of those movies from him that I kind of really enjoy. After all, it cracked my top five. So I have to go, okay, this is one of those times when it is fine to have a lot of style over substance, because
oh.
that's exactly what it's, kind of trying to get across here. After all, it's 300 men with sprayed on abs
Oh, good lord. Okay.
and kicking people and yelling, "This is Sparta." Sorry.
Gerard Butler's name has come up a lot tonight.
He certainly knows how to get around the ancient world, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, my number five is 300. Now, we've talked about 300 on this show once, maybe twice before. The thing is, so I'm going to keep it short. When it comes to ancient civilizations, this is, of course, the telling of the 300 Spartans that is that fought in the Battle of Thermopylae.
Yes.
and how the king of Spartan, against all odds, did not win that battle, but like carried on long enough, to make sure something or other. I don't know. But the point is, yes, this movie is all style. It's certainly that's it. You don't need some intricate backstory. What you're watching it for is this action filled slow motion escapade of scantily clad men just fighting and fighting and fighting until the credits roll. That's what you're signing up for. Unfortunately, that's kind of the only movie I think Zack Snyder's been able to kind of put out there. Uh, but what is it? Rebel Moon coming out later this year, and we'll see what happens there. But this is one of those times when that style absolutely works. Is it high drama? No. Is it great action? It's okay. More than okay. It's pretty good. Is it going to break your mind in any spots? No, not really. But if you enjoy a nice, again, overly using this words here, stylized action with a very um, specific look, 300 is definitely the movie you want to be watching, and that's why it's my number 5.
I mean, good. That's a great. I do actually really like that movie. Just so that everybody knows, really that even though they get the basics right, yeah, that's really not the story of the 300. I mean, it is, but it isn't. There were 300 warriors, and the king really did take them down to what they call the hot gates, and really did hold off an entire army for days and days and days until the Greeks came and gave them support. And yeah, they really did die. It really was a big thing. But I mean, uh, like we were talking about, Zack Snyder has a flair for the overdramatic. So, you know, Xerxes would probably didn't look like he dressed from Hot Topic, and most of the ninja warriors were probably not that stylized either. I mean, props uh, to the well, props to everybody, because the costuming, the makeup, the aesthetics, the choreography, everything was just off the charts with 300. But honestly, from a historical perspective, it kind of stops at, yeah, there were 300, and yes, they really did hold the hot gates. So anyway, a good choice though, really good choice.
And I said Thermopylae correctly.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. One of my favorite stories actually comes out of there, but we'll get into that in another day. Um, okay, my number 5 is a story, a story that, man, I'm really reaching into the archives here. Like reaching into the archives of movies that probably people just don't even ever have heard of. This particular movie, though, maybe some people have heard of it. It's called Quest for Fire. Quest for Fire um, is a movie that was an adaptation of a 1911 novel. And so that kind of gives you an idea of where this film sort of takes off from. It's a prehistoric fantasy. And the idea behind Quest for Fire is exactly what it sounds like. It's pre-humans want and desire to control and be in control of fire. It won a whole bunch of awards. It won an Academy Award. It won a BAFTA. It did a bunch of things for best makeup, and it really, I mean, like it's a very well made movie, very well made. There are basically a group of cavemen who are guarding a fire, and they use the small fires to start larger fires. And of course, as humans are wont to do, battles ensue over, sort of like warring tribes that also want control of fire. Um, there's in in this particular movie, the story is, of course, all around the fire, but it's it is such a crazy ride because we're not using a lot of language. We're showing things in big cinematic ways. And for that, it it's a different kind of encounter, if you will, with the cinematic experience. It does not feel like a regular movie. Well, does anything ever feel like a regular movie? But it feels very much like, there's a lot happening, but so much is happening in gesture and action on the screen, and small things that you have to pay attention to, or you don't really sort of know what's happening. And there, I found this whole movie to be uh, like interesting, and I won't say educational, but it was interesting on so many different levels. But other than that, it was compelling. I mean, you actually want these people to succeed. Um, Actually, I just really liked everything about it. Um, I think also maybe bigger uh one of the bigger like triumphs of this movie is it's not afraid to be really brutal in its presentation of what it might have been like to live as a human that long ago. And I mean, I say that, and I'm kind of halting because, like, there's things that happen in this movie that it's hard to unsee, but I feel like they're so important, because we are so very disconnected from this particular era. Excuse me, but at the same time, um, their tendencies are our tendencies. So even though we're very disconnected, we're still very much the same people. I don't know. There's something very kind of cool about it. So anyway, my number 5 is Quest for Fire. Quest for Fire is also just, by way of sort of like how some things were done, right? The screenplay was done by this French writer, and if you read the book and then you watch the movie, there's a lot of disconnect. But in this particular case, I feel like the adaptation did the book justice by changing the things that needed to be changed in order for us to understand it. Because we don't have, voiceover narration, because we don't have inner monologue, and because so much of what these people were doing requires that kind of inner monologue. So yeah, I give them a lot of credit. So number 5, Quest for Fire.
Oakley Dokley. You really went heavy on the ancient.
Yeah, well, yeah, I saw this. Okay, so this movie came out in 1981, right? And I think it was set in Paleolithic era, I'm pretty sure. And I was not prepared for what I saw. And I didn't get to see this in theaters. I would have been too young to see it in theaters. But when I finally did see this movie, I don't think I was actually prepared for what it was, so it left like a huge imprint on me. um and it really made me ask a lot of questions afterwards, and I think that is why I think it was such a good movie. I mean, it's hard to argue with an Academy Award. It was obviously good on other merits, but for me, it was very thought provoking. Like, I really thought about a lot of the stuff that was in this movie. And it made me rethink how I think about ancient man, ancient humans. So yeah.
Yeah, the whole Academy Awards thing is kind of a yeah. Because I mean, 3-6 Mafia are Academy Award winners. David Ayer's Suicide Squad won an Academy Award.
All I'm saying is clearly other people also appreciated it. Not that it was the best of the best with honors, sir. Just obviously other people contemplated that it also had some excellence in it.
Okay, that's fair. My number 4 is a movie that is frequently attributed with greatness. Quite frankly, it was one of the first movies that popped into my mind when you said, "Hey, this is the list." One of the first, because my top 3. Let me take a look. Two out of my top 3 were like immediate. This was like the third one I thought of, and then later on I was like, "Wait, this counts too," so I'm going to throw that in at a certain number. So, my number 4, which I will keep short, once again because we've talked about it on the show before, is 2000's the year 2000 from Ridley Scott, Gladiator. That was an interesting.
Gladiator 2 is in production right now.
It is. It's kind of a. You know what? Not going to take the bait. Not going to happen. For those of you that don't know, T-shirt forthcoming. The story of Gladiator is the story of a Roman Empire that's sort of at a crossroads. The people are kind of pissy. The emperor has died, and now the young Commodus has acquired the throne. But there is one man that stands between him and whatever it is that he's trying to accomplish, and that's the Spaniard. Well, long story short, they throw him in a gladiator arena. He kills a bunch of people and becomes, in wrestling terms, like the biggest baby face in the company. And when it's time, the emperor's like, what? No, you can't like this guy because I hate this guy. You have to hate this guy too. You have to hate this guy, pal. I'm not going to get all of you in my arena to have you cheer this guy I don't want you to cheer. Sorry, Vince McMahon broke through. Russell Crowe plays Maximus the Spaniard, as he was renamed upon capture. Joaquin Phoenix, I'd say this is the first movie that I noticed. Every once in a while you come across one of those movies that kind of makes you sit up and take notice of somebody. This was my sit up and take notice for Joaquin Phoenix. It's like this guy, he's good. He's an actor and he does good things. And then, of course, didn't realize till, much later than it should have been, come to think of it, that, the surname Phoenix doesn't really, proliferate, very, very much. You don't see it everywhere. And then, of course, he had a brother who had passed away. River, if I'm remembering right. River Phoenix it was, right, Jen?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to make sure that I didn't get that wrong. But Joaquin grew into quite the performer in his own right. We don't need to go over his IMDb. It's chock full of interesting stuff that he still continues to put out to this day. Although Some might say he's a little bit weird.
Yeah, he's kind of a joker.
I see what you did there, and I don't like it. No, but in all seriousness, um, even though Ridley Scott's been kind of all over the place with his takes on film recently, Gladiator stands the test of time. It does have some CG spots, some visual effects, if you will, of Russell Crowe fighting tigers. It's still it's fine today. You won't find it being distracting, especially considering it was a turn of the millennium movie. Now, with that being said, you got powerhouse performances and a classic epic story of a hero going on a specific journey uh, to kind of find not just redemption, not just like revenge, but also to you know sort of lead a people by performance into a new era for Rome. Gladiator is a top notch film, and that is why it is my number four.
So one of the things that is, I think, the most interesting about Gladiator happens to be one of the characters who dies really early, and that is Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius is, in fact, I even have Marcus Aurelius's meditations sitting on my nightstand because I read it every night. I love Marcus Aurelius as a what you would call a Stoic philosopher. His principles of leading a good life are some of just the best ideas altogether. And I love Stoic philosophy anyway, but I love the idea of reading something from so long ago that still has absolute relevance today. What I think is super interesting is Gladiator sort of conflates a number of different historical events altogether. And it's kind of like Rome's greatest hits from a certain era. You know, like that's so 90s and Kids Bop 2000 and whatever. That's sort of what Gladiator does. It brings together a group of stories and then tells them all together, conflating them into one big story. And it kind of works because honestly, you know. Most people don't know enough about ancient Roman history to tell the difference. And from a story perspective, it's definitely a strong story. I give Ridley Scott a lot of credit on this one because I do think the cinematography was good. Thank you so much, Mr. Scott, for leaving the rhino out because that would have been a giant mess. But that did happen. There were not just exotic animals in the Colosseum, but they hunted some animals in Africa to extinction in order to bring them to the Colosseum for gladiatorial games because the mob as we know them in Rome was so hungry continually for bigger, bolder, more horrific, events that they they hunted some animals to extinction in order to bring them to Rome. Very super interesting. The the idea of Commodus is sort of, I think, kind of like bringing together a bunch of different emperors that really had left bad taste in the mouth of most Romans. But the stark contrast is Marcus Aurelius, who was so stoic and who led Rome in a, let's just say, a facade of benevolence, because obviously he was not, he had a lot of the same issues that a lot of other emperors had, but he definitely had a different philosophy about ruling than most. And the contrast is you get Marcus Aurelius, who's sort of like this philosopher, and then you put in Commodus, who is like a temple clown almost. And it's fascinating because there are parallels to our modern day history sort of unfolding in front of us right now that really mirror this exact kind of thing. So uh, good choice. Gladiator is always a great choice. I do really like it as a movie. It's not historically super accurate, just like in the telling, but it's historically accurate in the inception of the ideas that are in there. So it works out really good. So good idea. Very good one.
Gracias, gracias.
Okay. My number 4. Okay, this movie, I wish I could have put this movie much higher. Because but I just couldn't because my other choices just sort of like yeah, they hit a certain way. But there's a movie that came out that's Italian. Um so so they already get points. And it's called Romulus the First King. Now, the founding of Rome legendarily comes from these two twins, Romulus and Remus, who supposedly had been raised by wolves, and or their a wolf was their mother. It's an interesting whole story, but Romulus, the first king, sort of picks up with them as adults, and the first thing that they face is a massive flood, and what we see is both of them sort of like understanding the world around them either through the gods or through something a little bit more practical. And it's a very visceral movie. There's a lot of heavy violence in it. It's very there's a lot of up close and personal violence, which is sort of disturbing. So it's not a quick like jog in the park sort of movie that you can half pay attention to. It's very gritty. Um, and they're not afraid to be absolutely terrible, which I feel like is also a hallmark of the time. It ultimately, they sort of skirt a lot. They skirt the idea uh of abducting the Sabine women by sort of like taking over a village, and it's a lot more yeah, benevolence probably a good word. I mean, it's a lot more acceptable in some ways than, the real harder stories of that. But it also really kind of tells an incredible story of bond between Romulus and Remus, and we don't get to, what Rome is sort of all about. It's really just who the brothers are. But as a foundation story, as a quote unquote origin story, the first king is really, really excellently done. The quality of the cinema here is not phenomenal. Okay, so like, despite the fact that this movie came out in 2020, it isn't like it's not like you're going to see something here that is cinematically going to take your breath away and you're going to go, oh my god, I can't believe that this was. But what you do get is this incredible visceral drama between the Romulus and Remus that you know from legend, and what that brother bond and relationship was. I mean, I have to say that they do some really interesting things in this movie that I personally just never would have thought of. It just like it and it works, and it makes it that much better. There is an English dub for this, and I think most people actually see it in the English dub. But again, if you can find it in uh Latin, well, they speak Latin, Italian, and then they also speak a kind of really old Latin, which I won't even get into. But it's interesting to hear it, because first of all, Latin's a dead language. We don't hear it unless we're watching it in a horror movie where they're summoning a demon. It's kind of cool to actually get a little bit of that feeling in just from a linguistic aspect in the movie. Um, I'll say one other thing about this movie. Um, it it doesn't end happy. And I shouldn't even say it like, because of course it's the story of Romulus and Remus. But I guess what I'm thinking is like, American audiences like a certain finish to the end of movies. This movie does not give you that. This movie is sort of far more open-ended, and it almost feels like, oh, wait a minute, is there more? Oh, I want more to this, and that's not what happens. Because then that would be a different story. But overall, it is truly, truly one of the only movies that I've seen that works for the Romulus and Remus story, that doesn't caricaturize Romulus and Remus and like turn them into demigods, or some kind of uh genius when it came to like some architecture, or tacticians, or oh my god, no, it makes them really strong. Well, one of them is really strong and the other is trying to get there, in this sort of charismatic way, and they care about each other so much that it drives everything else that they do. There's also this idea for deference to the gods, deference to fire, which exists in a way that I think it feels super authentic to that time period. It's more than superstition. It's a Although I think superstition's a big part of it. They talk about curses, they talk about a lot of that. But there is a deference to the gods through sort of like a supernatural understanding of the beginnings of what that religion will look like, that is, I guess it's not just authentic. It feels to me like somebody really did a bit of research into how this might translate, and I give them so much credit for that. So my number 4 pick is Romulus, the First King. Um, I said it was released in 2020. It might have been released in 2019. I think we got it in 2020. But really good movie. A really, really, really good movie. So that's my pick. And it scored really well on Rotten Tomatoes too. It got like a 75 or something. I mean, it did pretty good. So
Took me a second to find it, but yeah, I added it to your list.
I think it also was under the title "The First King: Birth of an Empire." It has a couple of title of, because there was like a title that it was released in Italy. There was a title that it was released in the US, and then there was also kind of like a working title that the production company used that also was associated with the film. So I think it has a couple of different titles.
Well, for the sake of Letterbox, it is listed as The First King,
There we go. Okay. And I
2019.
know you can watch this on Tubi.
Tubi is a good service, underestimated, I think.
Yes, yes. For a lot of really good movies that you can't find elsewhere. So
Well, you ready for my number 3?
I am.
Well, my number 3 is going to be introduced by way of Josh's acting theater.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I thought of a name for it. And that's where I say a line or two of dialogue from the movie, and you have to figure out what movie it is.
All right.
Although I have to admit, this is one of my favorite sequences in this movie, but it really does give it away pretty easily. So, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. I'm not the Messiah. Will you please listen? I am not the Messiah. Do you understand? Honestly, only the true Messiah denies his divinity. What? Well, what sort of chance does that give me? All right, I am the Messiah. He is! He is the Messiah! That's all I'm going to read from that.
Okay, so I'm just gonna take a guess. And say, well, first of all, I don't think this is from the Holy Grail. But I do think that it might be another Monty Python, well, awesomeness, called The Life of Brian.
It is Life of Brian.
How did I know?
Because Jen
This
knows everything.
the Life of Brian has my favorite Monty Python song other than the Galaxy song in Meaning of Life. Uh yes, exactly. Thank you. Thank you for whistling. Yes, that is the one. Always look at the bright side of life.
It's funny that song. This has nothing to do with the movie, really, but many years ago, God, it kills me to say that, but Green Day came out with a live album, and on that live album, called "Bullet in the Bible," they did sort of a not quite a medley, but they did their song "King for a Day,"
Mhm.
and like in the middle of it, threw in "Shout." It sort of breaks down into Billy Joe doing "Shout," but and when he gets to the a little bit quiet now, a little bit softer now, that thing,
Mhm.
um, he just busts out with "Always look on the bright side of life," and the whole, and this was done in England. The live album was recorded in England, and the entire stadium just starts whistling, and that was before I you know put two and two together, and I'm like, what is going on here? And of course, a couple days later, I was like, oh, right, yes, everybody loves Monty Python. How could I have not put that together? Where they are, and the context of everything. But it's a really cool kind of insert into um, one of their songs on the live album. One of my favorite live albums, really. But no, Life of Brian is uh, it's wonderful. It is the story of not of Jesus, but the baby that was born next door, and gets confused for he doesn't get confused for Jesus. He gets confused for the Messiah. So he has these morons, more or less, following him around, proclaiming him to be Messiah, and basically he's just getting into a lot of having a lot of issues because of this. And even though he's the whole time he's like, "What? Stop it, stop!" But they won't relent, and it eventually leads to, well, you know what it leads to. Another great line is, you know, prisoners are being lined up for their crucifixion, having someone basically at the door. You know, he's like, "Crucifixion, yes, good. Out the door, line on the left, one across each." No, freedom actually. What? Yeah, they said I hadn't done anything, and I could just go on and live on an island somewhere. Oh, I say that's very nice. Well, off you go then. No, I'm just pulling your leg. It's crucifixion, really. Oh, yes, very, very good. Yes, I know, out the
It's
door.
very Monty Python. I mean, it's so Monty Python that it reminds me of a skit again from I think Meaning of Life with the general in the square who's asking and telling everybody to they have to do drills basically marching up and down the square, and then they all come up one by one with an excuse for why they shouldn't have to march in the square. I mean, like, Monty Python does a lot of the same skit material again and again, but always in the most unique and awesome ways.
It's wonderful.
Yes,
Absolutely
absolutely.
wonderful. And what else floats? You can just sing a line like that. If you know, you know.
Yes, we love Sir
Duck.
Bedivere.
So, Monty Python, The Life of Brian. There's, if you haven't watched it, watch it. That's just basically what it boils down to. I can't exalt the virtues of this hilarious film other than to say that it's absolutely hilarious and mandatory watching for anybody that loves comedy. Period. That's why it's my number three.
Really good choice. Very good choice. My number three is actually an animated movie, first one on my list. And it actually never happened. So, I mean, historically, this really didn't happen, but I love it still because it incorporates so much of what we have lovingly referred to as our actual history. And I think in some ways, there was a Ramesses, there was sort of like this whole idea behind the taking over the sort of sunsetting of the pharaohs and how they actually came to be gods and stuff like that. I really love it for that. But more than anything, the Prince of Egypt makes me happy because the soundtrack is so good. Even after all these years, I still find myself singing those songs. We know now that there really was no mass exodus from Egypt under any of the pharaohs where somebody took, a mass of people out of uh, out of Egypt. It could have happened in a different way, but it didn't really originate, we don't think, in Egypt under a pharaoh. Um, we have much maligned sort of that part of the story in order to, I think, give ourselves the biggest supervillain of the day that we could have. And I mean, remember that Old Testament stuff was written a long time ago. So it's not there's a very interesting relationship that a lot of these stories have with the truth. But the Prince of Egypt does a great job of reconstructing ancient Egypt, of making the homes look like, I think, what real little places in Egypt would look like, and it also gives us this idea of the way that the pharaohs believed that they were gods. Like I said, the idea of sleight of hand and magic being divine is a big deal, and I think to the common person, it really would have been very convincing. So I loved this movie for a lot of different pieces. And one of the biggest pieces, I think, has nothing to do with actual Egypt, but it's when Moses goes out into the desert and is basically adopted by this tribe who are shepherds, and their life is just so rich and so complex and beautiful and wonderful, and that too feels very culturally significant. The Bible stuff is the Bible stuff, but honestly, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and that is, in the West, we have a very uneasy understanding, especially if you're millennial or younger. We have a very difficult relationship with the telling of Bible stories because I think the idea is, well, if you are reading Bible stories, or if you know Bible stories, then that infers that somehow you believe in Christianity, or that you are a faithful believer, you're a Christian, you're a what, and that's not really true. But it is important for us to understand that culturally in the West, Bible stories are incredibly important for all kinds of turns of phrase, for all kinds of understanding, um, about how we relate to certain things. So knowing, the plagues that came to Egypt, that's an important sort of part of other different stories that we also tell, because they get adapted, right? And we recognize immediately, if there are 10,000 frogs in the street, that it's a plague. It's a plague of frogs. It's not just that frogs, something happened, or and I think one of the coolest ideas was when they did um the Nile turning to blood. You know, there was this thing that happens in this movie where Ramses is almost ready to believe, and then he looks at his priest and he says, how could this be? And the priests replicate, you know, oh, it's not really the right, it's not what Moses does, but it's close to it enough that Ramesses is like, oh, okay, yes, I understand now. You can do it, I can do it, anyone can do it. And like, I feel like that's important for us to experience and understand that, you know, here are the the significances of this. Everybody knows the Moses story. Willow in the beginning is a Moses story, right? Elora Danan goes down the river on that big patch of earth and stuff, and she's basically a baby adrift on the river trying to escape danger. That's a Moses story. And I feel like these are important culturally for us to understand. So anyway, so going back to Prince of Egypt, lots and lots of what we consider to be culturally significant pieces are in this. There's the burning bush. There's the plagues that are sent to Egypt. There's Moses parting the Red Sea. There's so much in here that is important, both for us to sort of all understand, because this is a big huge story in in the West's understanding of the Old Testament, but also because it's just a generally good story. This is a really, really good, compelling story. And if we were to take out the religion from it and just tell it as a story, we would all go, wow, that's an amazing story. So, uh, on top of that, like I said, the soundtrack is, it kicks so hard. I love the soundtrack for The Prince of Egypt. Um, it's amazing. There's so many good standout songs in this. So The Prince of Egypt gets my number three choice. I will say, you know, if you decide to watch this, if you haven't watched it and you decide to watch it, pay really close attention to the way that they age Moses, because it's beautiful. They do a wonderful job of sort of not being afraid of really embracing this idea that as people age, they also, things change for them. And I really give it a lot of respect for that too. So number three, the Prince of Egypt.
That is sort of off trend.
Yeah, a little bit, but I felt like this was an important one to have in here.
Very good. Very good. I guess it's time for my number two.
Number two.
Number two. Well, I'm going to put it this way. The last time this movie was brought up on this show, it wasn't by me. In fact, I hadn't even watched it at that point.
Oh.
But after hearing about it, after Jen's case for why it should be on her list, I watched it, as I try to do whenever there's anything that catches my ear from Jen's list. But this one really stuck with me. And in fact, shortly after I watched it, same day, I want to say, I reached out to Jen and we chatted for a good little bit about it.
Oh, I know what it is now.
Yes, I'm talking about Clerks.
Well, we always talk about Clerks,
In
so that's
ancient New
really just
Jersey.
every day. Yes, that's an everyday event. We talk about Clerks.
The ancient times of 1990s New Jersey. No? Okay. I'm talking about Hero. Hero, 2002, directed by... Nope, not gonna try.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It, as you were mentioning earlier with your Red Cliff, it's sort of the telling of how China became China. You know, gathering the kingdoms. By the way, just a little tangential note. You were talking about stories of, you know, ancient China and talking about the three kingdoms and whatnot. That's what every Dynasty Warriors game is about. And there's a lot of them. So when it comes to, I don't know, like the generals and stuff that they mention by name in the games are like real people, like Libu or but quite frankly, yeah, I didn't realize that it was so entrenched into the culture and the history that these things were not just fodder for gaming. Uh, Never really watched a movie about the history of China before. Not this era in particular, but Hero, starring Jet Li, is not your average run of the mill Jet Li movie. It's not carried by over the top action by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, most of the action comes down to um, arrows or just duels. And yes, the duels are high flying, wonderful pieces of, dare I say, art, as the depictions of, the fights get uh, admittedly exaggerated. But when it comes down to it, what you're watching, as Jen and I talked about, where what you're watching when you watch Hero is the story of a man telling a story by a director slash writer telling a story. So you're like three times removed from the actual events, especially since during those trip through the layers, you definitely have narrators that are being intentionally unreliable, depending on which layer you want to examine. And it becomes this great story within a story within a story. And every time you think you've got it kind of figured out, somebody says, but no, that's not how it happened at all. This is how it happened. And you go, oh. Usually in a situation like that, you might get frustrated, right? They're like, oh, you want to throw in another twist. Who are you? M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong? Um,
Mm.
Sorry, that's force of habit to make fun of the name. Shyamalan, talented director for the most part, enjoy his work. Now just leave that there. But whenever like a new element is introduced to the stories that are being told, because it's the story about I, I'm drawing a blank on any names here, but what it boils down to is this guy, he defeats three assassins, and because the um emperor, was that the right term?
Mhm.
Okay, because the emperor is so afraid of especially these three assassins, um, he offers these outrageous rewards for anybody that can kill any one of them. But this hero manages to kill all three, and he approaches the emperor. He's allowed to see the emperor to explain exactly what happened, and then the emperor has a rebuttal, and then it becomes this whole thing. I don't want to. I mean, it's a movie from 2002. It's 21 years old, but it went under my radar for so long. I mean, I knew about it. I knew it existed. I just I saw that it was like an ancient China setting. It's like I love Jet Li, But if he's not like an action cop kicking billiard balls into people's faces, I don't know if I'm going to be into that. Turns out, yes, very much so. But if you haven't seen it, all of you in listener land, if you haven't seen it, by all means, you check it out. It is not even 2 hours yet. It's not a super long investment in your time. But the funny thing is, those 99 minutes that it's listed as feels it feels more epic than it has, quite frankly, any right to. Usually, when someone says a movie feels longer than it actually is, that's a detriment. It means it's dragging. You're not feeling it. You're not really getting into it. For some reason, when you watch, or at least when I watched Hero, it didn't seem like it was just like an hour and a half. It seemed like it took much longer, but not because I wasn't into it, but because I was, so hooked into paying attention to all of the little details and seeing these fights play out in such creative ways. I just it felt like every second of the movie was optimized for my entertainment. Even if it wasn't for me going, oh, that looked cool, it would switch to, oh, that was a very cool story point. There is no wasted space in this movie. It's in fact, I I gave it 4.5 stars, and Jen was like, "What do you mean 4.5? What are you talking about?" It's like, yeah, some of the arrow physics seemed off. But Jen reminded
Well,
me about the unreliableness of narrators and how that could affect the actual, you know, the way the story is portrayed. Like, yeah, I guess, yeah, that makes sense.
huh.
But Hero is, like Mary Poppins, practically perfect in every way. And don't don't be silly and try to watch some sort of dubbed version. I don't even know if that's possible,
Oh,
but just watch the subs, do a little bit of reading, let the actors act with their voices, and enjoy one of the best 90-minute epics ever. Heroes my number two.
yeah. I mean, I don't even need to say that that was a good choice. Of course, it was a good choice. It's one of my favorite movies. Okay. My number two is a movie that, when it was released, kind of caused a little bit of a stir. Um, it, it's interesting how we have, uh, eh, it's interesting how we have treated the historical movie, and then what sort of happened, on the same timeline in Hollywood. Um, we were at one time very committed to doing the epic, the broad and sweeping sort of stories where studios would really flex and say, "Look at what we can do." Now, this particular movie, um, I personally think was absolutely astounding. And it was shot on a budget of 7.6 million. It earned 21 million. Didn't make like $1 billion, but it did pretty good. And in subsequent years, it's actually gained quite a bit of a cult following. So it's really excellent. The movie is called Quo Vadis. It was from 1951, and Quo Vadis loosely translates in Latin to uh, "Hey, where you going?" Like it's kind of like a passing thing that you would say to somebody, "Where you going?" It basically dramatizes Nero's end of reign, and This movie, produced by Metro Goldwyn Mayer, has the kind of big Hollywood feel that movies like Cleopatra once did, where the sets are like larger than life, where, there's so many extras in a time before CGI when you know that those are people. They weren't digitally manufacturing more people in a scene than they had. There's actually tons and tons of people in there. Um, there are plenty of fictional events in this movie, but there are plenty of real history events too. So, we're basically looking at Rome is at a fever pitch with its sort of uh, struggle and conflict with Christianity. And this is sort of one of those, it's a moment in time that most people, most historians recognize as this was Rome's do or die moment. And they, through mismanagement in from the emperor's standpoint, from the ruler's standpoint, really, um, through not taking things as seriously as they should have, um, they absolutely screwed up. Rome became a viper's den, a cesspool of corruption, and as a result, Rome is huge at this point, and it only works as well as its bureaucracy. It's one of those things that's like, when you say that there's parallels in history, we we as a nation are only as strong as our bureaucracy, and it drives everybody crazy because they're like, oh, I hate bureaucracy. But honestly, that's what makes everything run. That's how you get municipalities, and it was no different than in Rome. Rome was very much built on its bureaucracy. So you insert tons of corruption, you insert people that didn't know what they were doing, people that were elected to office because they could line pockets and had zero want in actual public service. And basically, Rome started to crumble at the seams. Um, and then on top of that, we have Nero, who, there's a great line about Rome burned while Nero fiddled. And I mean, it sort of encapsulates how Nero sort of looked at Rome as if it was just like one giant plaything, and he really was detached from the whole thing. And I don't really care. This isn't really affecting me, and that kind of thing. And the movie does a pretty good job of expressing some of that. Um, I think one of the one of the biggest things that I really loved about this movie has nothing to do with the movie. It has to do with the fact that this movie, uh, bailed MGM out of bankruptcy. They were ready to fold. They had had just a string of absolute failures on their hands, and they just could not seem to bring money in. They spent $7 million on this movie. They recouped 21. It got them just out of the red enough that they could sort of restructure and resurrect themselves. Um, Notable performances in this. One interesting little piece of trivia is apparently Katharine Hepburn uh, had been scheduled to play one of the characters in this movie, and they even had wardrobe for her. But then they decided to go with someone who actually had an MGM contract, so she didn't get the part, which is kind of sad. This was in the day when studios still were giving actresses and actors contracts. So, like you didn't have free agents, Tom Cruise wasn't out there peddling, what could he do? It was MGM saying, "Hey, we own you. We own your contract. You do 4 pictures for us a year. This is how it works." That's how it used to be. Um so we have in this movie, we have Sophia Loren, which is, if you don't know Sophia Loren, what are you doing? Go find Sophia Loren. We also have Peter Ustinov, who was one of those, big, well-known actors of the time. And there are some unknown at the time, but then, people that began to get more and more notice, like Robert Taylor, Deborah Kerr, and I'll say one thing. Um, part of the strength of Quo Vadis is in its actual editing. Um, there are some really long shots in this movie, and to I think the editor's credit, they don't do the kind of thing that they used to do a lot back then, which is sort of like go between uh, these short shots, and it almost kind of gives you whiplash. Like some of the older movies, there's so much editing in it that it starts making you feel a little bit seasick after a while. But to their credit, this movie really lets you linger on some of the big shots. It gives you these wide, expansive feels of the grandeur of ancient Rome. And the sets are absolutely stunning. I mean, they're enormous. And the thing is that they were really built, like they really built these things. So it's all practical effects, everything that you see. There's obviously there's quite a bit of painted scenery, but the painted scenery is where people are standing with props. Those props are real. That is absolutely amazing. There's a lot in this movie that is sort of contentious. Well, not contentious. There's a lot in this movie that is that's difficult. I guess there are some contentious things in it too, but there's a lot of things that are difficult. There are some, attempted suicides. There are a lot of very questionable relationships between men and women, which are, some consensual, some not consensual. Um, Overall, this movie, I think, really gives you a strong feeling of what we understand ancient Rome to have been about. It does, kind of go for the poor Christians, while not necessarily, um, well, I won't even say that. It casts the Christians in the light of, yes, they were victims, but it also ends on a Bible scripture verse, and so you can see that they're really saying is, so Christianity becomes kind of the fall of the Roman Empire. I don't necessarily think that that's true, but I think that mishandling everything that they mishandled contributed to the complete decline and the ability for the Romans to kind of, do anything productive when they had the chance to do it. I don't think that Christianity made the Roman Empire fall at all. That's kind of silly. Um uh Peter Ustinov as Emperor Nero is phenomenal. Who else can I call out? I think maybe one of the other really good ones is this guy named Leo Gen, who was Petronius. The character of Petronius plays a very huge part in this movie, and he's very, very, very good. Um, some of the other interesting kind of characters in this movie, which I won't go through, are, they're only in the movie for a short time, but they really lend a lot to the film. So I highly suggest this movie. If you look at stills from this movie, they look like little art paintings. They look like they should be hung up and framed. So that there was a lot of thought behind the camera. They were still using the same kind of angles that they were using in 1951, which is pretty much straight on at the character, but there's enough uh broad um use of wide shots, without using big giant sky cranes, that really give you again that depth of, wow, this is grand. There's something huge happening here. So Quo Vadis gets my number two choice, and I'm sorry I went on so long about that, but I really love this movie. It's just a phenomenal movie.
Spell it.
Quo Vadis is Quo, next word Vadis.
Quo. What year?
1951, I think. Pretty sure it was 1951.
Strangely enough, There are a lot of titles with that name.
Yeah, this it definitely became a thing. Also, Quo Vadis kind of launched Helen of Troy, Ben Hur, and then Cleopatra later. So it does a little bit for the for the epic storytelling later.
I guess there's only one thing left.
The number one.
My number one.
Dun dun dun.
And if you've been paying attention to this show at all since its inception, you know that if there's any opportunity to put Kevin Smith in my number one slot, I'm going to do it. Unfortunately, that opportunity didn't come. But you also know that if there's any other opportunity to put Mel Brooks in the number one slot, I'm going to do it. And that's exactly what I did. My number one, the greatest movie about ancient civilizations of all time. History of the World, Part 1. Now, yes, I know that it doesn't take place in a singular era, which is what makes it so great. Starting in the Stone Age, heading to the Old Testament, the Roman Empire, Spanish Inquisition, French Revolution, all of it's represented. And I will say this in my defense, most of it takes place in the ancient world. I'd say the runtime is more spent there than anywhere. So I'm going to count it. History of the World Part 1, as I said, it's a sort of a sketch comedy film in the way that it covers the different eras. More specifically, we'll talk about the Roman Empire as Comicus, played by Mel Brooks. The stand-up philosopher is trying to get to his gig at Caesar's palace, and you know, it's Caesar, like Caesar. You get what I'm saying? In the meantime, he finds a friend in Josephus, and well, a lot of shenanigans happen.
Double time Harch? Yes.
You want to? I could have done Josh's whatever I named earlier theater because this movie is infinitely quotable.
Madeline Kahn is so amazing.
I love Double Time Hotch. The nods and the. Excuse me, have you seen a pack of Trojans? I just sold my last one. Everything about this movie is hilarious. Jesus Christ, yes? What? Jesus Christ, yes? What? If you know, you know. That's how it breaks down. Mel Brooks is, and I don't use the past tense because he's still alive, but he
Still
is
making movies.
A comic genius. Could be arguably the greatest comic writer of all time. And there's going to be a lot of people that would want to debate that. But I have a feeling there's going to be some people that would be on my side too. Mel Brooks not only does the story a tremendous service with his writing and his acting, but his directing as well. He's, as we would say on the podcast, he's a certified wad just from this film alone, because he carries the creative performance and like I said, the directing so much without even breaking a sweat, it seems. So the visual gags, which of course would not be translated well to this audio format, even though some of you are watching on video, but licensing and whatnot. The visual gags are just the signs alone, around the palace and a certain event coming up. No pun intended. Um, beautiful, beautiful. Moses getting mugged, um, having the Spanish Inquisition break out the song and dance. Exquisite. Uh, the French, I know we're talking about ancient times, but just the French Revolution. Um, oh, piss boy, oui, oui, yes, a lot of it. You know, it makes me giddy with how much I love this movie, and it you know, I don't know where I was going to go with that, but don't walk, run to wherever you need to go to watch this right now. Now, with that being said, there was a sequel of sorts, History of the World Part Two. It's teased in the sort of coming attractions at the end of History of the World Part One, which is odd because History of the World Part Two came out like this year, and History of the World Part One came out in 1981. So 42 years between the first and the second. And I will say this: the second is, um, I think, enjoyable as an homage to what History of the World Part One was, but it doesn't equate. But after 42 years, I think it would be difficult to kind of match that energy that was brought so hard by Mel Brooks in the early 80s. Um, but that's neither here nor there. History of the World Part One is number one in my book. Will always be number one in my book when it comes to movies about ancient civilizations. Um, Especially, I try to keep things absolutely explicit free on the show. So a lot of the things that I really want to quote, I can't quote. Um, so I'll paraphrase. Um, Comicus in the unemployment line. So what do you do? I'm a stand-up philosopher. Oh, so you're a BS artist? No. So yeah, the BS artist line just kills me every time. It's beautiful. Did you BS last week? No. Did you try to BS last week? Yes. Yes. History of the World Part One, number one. Boom. Shakalaka. Shakalaka.
BS.
So there you have it. Jen?
Yeah, good. That was a guy. Let me just say, I think that movie is uniquely you. Um,
It feels like it was made for me.
yeah, um, like I can't say that oh, I think that deserves the number one spot because why? I I mean, yeah, I guess it. Yeah, I mean, it's very funny. It's very funny. It's Mel Brooks funny. If you like Mel Brooks, you'll like it. Um, Not everybody loves Mel Brooks, so maybe you might not like
Everybody
it.
loves Mel Brooks.
But, um, but yeah, I don't know if it would be number one. I don't know. That
I
sort of
throw in a
feels.
lot of sentimentality to my selections.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. I'm gonna move to my number one.
Yes, please.
Okay. My number one is a movie that recently has actually gotten a little bit of a resurging attention. And part of that has to do with a cut of the movie that apparently was found, and they kind of like did a little bit of re-editing. The movie is called Spartacus. It now the reason that I chose Spartacus is because I feel like this film is probably one of the most influential films about ancient Rome in particular. Um, but it qualifies something in ancient Roman society, which I feel like we're having a very difficult time talking about, and in our own society, much like history loves to mirror itself, we're also struggling with at the time, which was this idea of civil rights. And distilling this down with Spartacus is a little bit difficult because you know the situations are not the same exactly, but the feel is very much the same. And in 1960, this movie definitely struck a chord. We're dealing with both a segregation of populations and also sort of understanding what makes a person a person. Why are you a slave? And how does that make you less of a person than anyone else? And Spartacus sort of, for lack of a better, term, rises to the occasion to say, no, actually, I think we're all people and we all get to enjoy the same benefits of this society. This world is doesn't get to just segregate us into little bits and pieces. Spartacus really does a lot of that. But from a film standpoint, Spartacus stands almost by itself, being directed by Stanley Kubrick. Uh, Stanley Kubrick it has a very unique style, right? And if you've seen The Shining, you kind of get that feel. But in Spartacus, this is many years before The Shining, and there's something unique about the storytelling here. I'll say that Kirk Douglas is one of the strongest leads, it's sort of like in a generation. So obviously that fits. But Laurence Olivier also makes a very strong character presence here. And the two of them together, um, including Tony Curtis, and then, I go back to Peter Ustinov because he's in this movie too. Um, all of them together make just like one of the strongest casts that I can remember in a very long time seeing. This is it's different from a lot of other movies, even with sort of like similar content, because the temperament of the movie is different. There's a lot of really raw anger happening in this movie, and rightly so. But it's coupled with sort of like acceptable violence, unacceptable violence, and kind of like coming to grips with what's important, what isn't important. How do you how do you even figure that out? What's worth fighting for, what's not worth fighting for? When do you know when enough is enough? And I don't know, Spartacus does something that just hits hard. The movie itself is 3 hours long. And the servile wars in Rome were, um, let's just say that like we don't do a lot of studying about the servile wars in Rome, but they were incredibly important and pivotal to the reformation of organized slavery in Rome. There was a lot that went into Spartacus as a real life figure had a lot to do with how Rome reinterpreted its labor altogether. It didn't end slavery, but it did sort of give a really interesting ideas to how they were treating or what they were doing with slaves. Um, I think one of the most fascinating parts of Spartacus altogether is this idea that as the historical methodology of well, film as a historical methodology of, letting us see sort of what might have been happening back then, like I said at the outset, is kind of a mirror to what we are experiencing in our own society now. And I see Spartacus a lot like I see King Arthur stories. We tell and retell Spartacus stories based on how we are feeling in our culture, in our society at the moment about social iniquity. And we heavily either empathize with the slaves, and we give them a kind of Robin Hood status, or we give them a little bit less of that, and we give the Roman citizens a little bit more empathy, like how terrified must they have been. And we do that by telling the story from unique perspectives. Spartacus definitely tells the story and says, no, we're not going to do this from the perspective of you. We have all these empathetic Romans out here. It definitely tells the story like Spartacus as Robin Hood. But I've seen it go lots of different ways. And again, in the 1960s, this is what we were dealing with. So it gets my number one choice for a number of different reasons. One, because the movie itself is just great. Kirk Douglas is amazing. The whole story is, Spartacus was a gladiator. He escaped from a school. There really was a ludus that was in Capua, and the owner of the ludus was named Batiardus, and his school was basically the fuel for the beginning of the Servile Wars. Spartacus gathered with him every place that he went other slaves. They freed other slaves from all kinds of different places, not just other gladiators. And all of a sudden, you have trained warriors basically out there in the countryside, and the Roman army did not know how to deal with these people. I mean, the Roman army had zero understanding, and I think I've said this before in one of my other movies. When it wasn't pre-planned battle, the Romans did not have a really good tactical plan about dealing with wayward militia or guerrilla kind of warfare, and that's exactly what the what the Spartacus army was fighting. Now, the Spartacus army also kind of divided into different factions, and that's not stuff that we get to really see in the movie, although there's a little bit of it. But what we do see is, I think, a really authentic kind of feel for this level look at what inequality does to not just a nation but a culture, how it upends it and turns everything into battles where battles don't need to be, um where it creates social injustice in a way that you might not even understand. You might not even think about it as social injustice, and yet there it is. So I chose Spartacus as my number one movie for all those reasons. And I think the last reason is because Spartacus as a story has always been one of my favorite underdog stories. Coming from nothing, rising to, just incredible heights. And then, it seems like, well, his story died because he, obviously all the slaves were crucified on the Appian Way. But the legend is so huge that we still talk about it today. I mean, there's plenty of flashpoints in history that we have zero discussion about, and probably, unless you're in an archaeological circle or unless you're talking serious anthropology with a bunch of history geeks, you're not going to know about them. But Spartacus, we know about, because that's how big this was. That's how big the legend of this man was, not just the Servile Wars, Spartacus. So, I am Spartacus. Number one choice.
And with that, our lists are complete.
Have you seen Spartacus?
I have not.
That hurts my heart, Josh. I mean, Stanley Kubrick is one of those directors that, like, you should strive to see every movie he has made because they are all so qualitatively excellent.
Who?
So, Stanley Kubrick.
Never heard of her.
2001 A Space Oh my god, get out of town.
What, was that too much?
Yeah, this is going to be my Josh, you have to watch this because if you don't watch it, I'm just going to keep hounding you until you actually do watch it. And I know that this movie is available on TCM. So, you should definitely watch it.
So you're saying I might have to watch this?
I'm saying if you don't, I will hound you like a ghost that has some serious unfinished business.
Not seeing a downside here.
Okay, fine. I'll just get my chains out and,
Okay, this show's taking a weird turn. So,
to rattle, of course.
oh yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. One of us has to recap our list so the other person can. So, who do you want to go first?
All right, I'll go first. Number 10, Ashoka. Number 9, Redcliffe. Number 8, Druids. Number 7, The 13th Warrior. Number 6, Missing Link. No, not the animated version. Number 5, Quest for Fire. Number 4, Romulus, the First King. Number 3, The Prince of Egypt. Number 2, Quo Vadis. Number 1, Spartacus.
All right. Now that my list is ready to go, by the way, when I finish my list, I will be giving our homework assignment for the week. So you will all know what our next list is going to be about. By the way, if you want to see these lists and all of their glory, you can go to letterboxd.com, follow 1021pod. They're individually listed as Josh's Ancient Times and Jen's Ancient Times. So there's that. Make sure you give it a follow because Letterboxd is cool. So my number 10, The Scorpion King. My number 9, Beowulf. My number 8, Year One. Number 7, The Croods. Number 6, Clash of the Titans. Number 5, 300. Number 4, Gladiator. Number 3, Life of Brian. Yeah, I'm terrible with an English accent. Number 2, Hero. And number 1, The Inquisition. History of the World Part 1. So that was my top 10 Ancient Times list. Now time for the next homework assignment, which has been a long time coming. And quite frankly, I'm surprised we got so far. We've done so many episodes and have not touched on this topic yet. But I did say earlier, I'm going to have to reveal something at the end of the show, and that's what this is, because I had a completely different thing lined up for next week's list. But something that was said on the show tonight made me go, nope. We have to recalibrate. We have to reset. And we're getting a completely different list topic than I had originally planned. Because we were talking about Michael Crichton. We were talking about Sphere and, how much of a bummer it was. And, how Jurassic Park actually seemed to nail it pretty good, although nobody said anything about Congo, which, it is what it is. I thought, you know what? Maybe we should talk about adaptations from books that do justice to the original source material. Now, I'm not saying it has to be a straight up a perfect adaptation, where everything is one for one. That we're not going for accuracy, just something that does justice to the source material and maybe even does it better than the source material. Although I figured that might be a little bit more rare.
So
Um,
we kind of did this already.
I looked at all of our lists and we haven't done anything like it.
Yeah, we did one where we talked about our favorite books that we wanted to be adapted.
Yes,
Okay, I'm just letting you know that
we
we
had
did a
our
little
wish
something like
list,
that. Right.
and this is going to be things that were already made
Oh,
but
gotcha.
done well.
Done well. Okay. All
We
right.
we talked about things that I mean, we didn't make lists about things that didn't do well. You know, things that weren't adapted very well. That could probably be a list later on down the road. But I don't. You know, I want to go into next week and have like a positive vibe going on. So
I think we
let's
can definitely do that. I already know what my number one is. I know what my number one favorite adapted movie is.
and it's not Sphere.
No, no. But it will come as no surprise to anyone who knows me.
Now, just to get your 2 cents on it, do you think it should just be um, based on written works like books and short stories, or should we open it up to other things as well?
Well, I don't see any reason why we can't do like, a graphic novel or um, something like that. I mean, if the Inception has source material and that's where the adaptation came from, then I think that works.
Well, I'm saying that like the difference between um, an adaptation of a TV show or a video game versus adaptations of written works.
Yeah, see, I think the problem that I have with movies that are adapted from either video games or from other TV shows is that then then we're sort of getting almost meta because there's writers that are already attached uh to game to the game unless it's like an original game. I don't know. See, no, I think you should stick with books. Or printed like graphic novels, books. I mean, that would be my take.
Yeah,
Because I
that's what I
feel
was
like you get
thinking.
too far into the weeds with some of the other stuff.
Plus, I would like to leave the those kinds of topics open for different lists, different interpretations. Top 10, TV shows turned film, top 10
Right,
video
right.
games. Whatever the case may be. Just um, yeah, I think you're right. Just leaving it with we'll say written works, whether it's novels, short stories, graphic novels. Um, I'm going to exclude straight up Marvel DC Comics.
Hmm. Okay.
Otherwise, my list is just going to be like, hey, I have 6 Spider-Man movies. So, so
Okay.
that's not the spirit of what I'm looking for. I'm talking, you know, what I said.
That makes sense. I think that totally makes sense.
You know what else makes sense?
What's that?
Matching your meals to movies that you want to watch.
Mm.
If I wanted to do that, Jen, where could I possibly do that? Get some ideas for that.
You should head over to moviesandmeals.com. Um, so we were over the past couple of days talking about some movies that didn't have any representation whatsoever in our that comes from our list that comes from and I find that movies and meals sometimes veers into the TV show serial sort of format, but most of the recipes at moviesandmeals.com come completely from just movies. So there is probably something over there that you will like. There are kids recipes, there are grown-up recipes, there's nothing super fine dining, but tons and tons and tons of fun. So moviesandmeals.com, join me over there. It's a lot of fun.
Cool. I know it's a website that I have been to before, and look forward to actually utilizing some of the ideas in the
It's
near
fun.
future. Hmm.
That's it. It's just fun. Period. And how and how about you? I hear that there are new ways to find you on the internet. Is that true?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Nah, I'm just playing. Um, I'm yeah, I amuse
I
myself,
mean, there
and
might have
sometimes
been,
that's
but
it.
not now, since you called it out.
Okay. If you are interested in anything that I am doing, me, Josh, or Wadco Media, first you can head over to wadcomedia.com where you can find all of the pertinent links to the social media pages as well as the merchandise store. Hey, get your very own 10-1 t-shirt because they're cool. I have one. You should have one too. They're full of whimsicality.
Always a good
Yeah,
thing to have plenty of.
always. And I enjoy wearing my 10-1 shirt around and have people go, what does that mean? Like, it's a show that counts down things in list form. 10, 2, 1. Get it? Like, oh, okay.
Oh, people near you are dumb.
Yeah, Florida.
Hmm. Oh, that explains so much.
Hmm.
Yes. I mean, sorry, the rest of Florida. We love you. I'm just joking. I'm
So
just kidding.
there's that. And if you want to hear other shows, um, like, I don't know, the Wadcast, which is live streaming every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific over the Wadcast Facebook channel, redistributed here on Modco Media, and available wherever podcasts are sold every Sunday, as that's when I do my uploads uh, to the, you know, distribution stuff. You can do that. There's also a Patreon, but hey, just head on over to the merch place instead. It means less money for us, but you know what? That's fine. I'd rather you have something you can hold in your hands and, enjoy rather than throwing money into an idea that something might happen. That seems more smart to me. But speaking of the Wadcast, if you go over to the wadcast.com, it is a wonderful place to find out stuff too. Now that it's not just saying it doesn't exist, stop trying to come to here. And that's all thanks to the marvelous lady sitting across from me, figuratively, Jen.
You're welcome. Much much like a really well-rounded ancient Roman, who would have been a guy, I guess, because probably girls wouldn't have been able to do this. But my purview includes technology, food, and podcast hosting. So I wear many hats.
Many hats indeed. A true Renaissance person.
I like to think of myself that way. Man, all of a sudden I feel like super intellectual and I have done absolutely zero to earn that. So
Like
thanks. That
most
is
Renaissance
super
people.
awesome. Yeah, right. That actually feels really, really good. So yeah, yeah. We should do this more often, where we just like throw accolades toward me because yep, feeling pretty good about that.
Well, then I should carry around a tape recorder because I do it all the time. I say, you know why this works? Because I have a Jen. That's why
I'm
this
like
works.
I'm like the Swiss Army knife of podcast hosts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Say,
that's
you
good.
need somebody to talk about something? Well, let's get Jen.
Now I feel like that kid from the commercial. Hey, it's Life cereal. I don't know if I'm gonna like it. Hey, let's ask Mikey.
Let's ask Jen. Jen knows everything.
Okay, stop. Good lord.
You don't want me to stop, but I will anyway.
I am really excited actually about next week's. I've just been sitting here putting together a sort of loose and fast list, and man, I got some good ones.
Yeah, I got.
And they're movies that we have never talked about before, so super exciting.
I'm looking at my shelf, my bookshelf, which is like literally right. It's in my line of sight from where I'm sitting, and I'm like, yeah, then that could be one, that could be one, that could be one, that one.
Nice.
Love that one. So yeah. And by the way, we're also both kind of book people too. So this kind of
a little bit,
kind
a little bit
in our wheelhouse. And I can't speak for Jen, but I know when I walk into a local bookstore, one that's not a corporate chain, and it's like, hey Josh, it's like, hey, they know me. That's kind of scary.
Yeah, my happiest days are library days. Those I give up things to go to the library. So yes, books are super important.
Always read. It keeps your brain smart. But also listen to podcasts. More of them. More of them with Jen.
You can always read the transcripts. That'll also make you smart. I mean, it's words. Words are good.
That's what I should do. I should print out the transcripts and sell them as novels.
Hey, as somebody who specializes in SEO for other people's websites, transcripts are a good thing. We like transcripts.
I wonder how many words we say per episode.
Probably way too many. I mean, we could probably pare the podcast down simply by cutting out superfluous words. I do notice that we definitely wax a little bit poetic.
Maybe every once
But
in a
I
while.
also feel like that gives the podcast character. So I'm not going to mess around with a good winning formula.
I'm definitely not going to calm down on my passion for the things that we list. How dare you, not you, Jen, but the random you of somebody out there saying, get on with it already. Like, how dare you, random person, say that we should, stop doing the thing that we're awesome at. How dare you? Now, don't forget to tune in next week. I guess with all that being said, t-shirt forthcoming. There's only one thing left to do, eh?
Only one last thing to do, I think.
Well, then, say goodnight, Jen.
Good night, Jen.
Good night, everybody.
My name's